Chapter 1095. Grimm silently opened his eyes. The fiery heart in his body was still beating strongly and rhythmically, sending waves of pure golden flames to every part of his body. This golden flame was completely different from the flame energy of the past. Aside from the violent and ferocious energy of destruction, there was also a trace of strange energy that was hard to detect. Grimm's spiritual consciousness was like a chick that had just hatched from an egg. With the support of powerful energy, it suddenly stretched out from his body and swept out in all directions. The whole town was now a world of darkness. This was not a description, but an objective and cold reality. Unknowingly, waves of dense shadow energy had spread to every corner of the town, and it was still spreading and strengthening. Seriously speaking, Maplewood Town had been pulled into the shadow realm by a huge wave of shadow energy, turning it into a strange shadow-like domain. In such a domain, shadow creatures and dark magic could display their full power, no longer affected by the interference and suppression of the Morian plane. To achieve such an effect, it was impossible to rely on a mid-grade 4 dark witch alone, unless, of course, she had the support of the Dark Witch's origin tower. The powerful and pervasive shadow energy flowed wantonly in the town. They were like dark shadows of varying depths, occupying almost all the space in the town, except for the 4 magi. Every single rank 4 magus was powerful and terrifying. Therefore, before the shadow-like domain was formed, the wanton shadow energy deliberately avoided the area where the magi were, preferentially occupying the other positions. The shadow energy did not dare to enter Grimm's room in order to avoid alerting the enemy. Wizard Hiri's room was protected by a strange starlight energy, and it was strangely difficult to enter silently. Only Chiolisha, who was sitting in a restaurant on the first floor, had a thin but incomparably tough mental barrier around her, firmly blocking the shadow energy from entering. As for the Dark Witch Shunny's room, to put it bluntly, it was probably the source of the shadow energy in the town. As for the shadow vortex on the outside, it was just a kind of instinct of the shadow power gathering on its own. Balls, pieces, and layers of shadow energy were like wild sharks in the deep sea, drifting in the dark sky above the town. They frantically circled around Grimm's room, but did not dare to take even half a step in. When Wizard Hiri and the 2-headed magus made it clear that they would not interfere in this internal conflict, an invisible war immediately began. Thinking about how he was about to fight to the death with a magus of the same rank, Grimm's spirit was strangely excited and manic. However, this did not affect his thinking. Instead, it allowed him to remain in a raging calmness. The strange energy that flowed out from the golden flames fused with his spiritual force, causing his spiritual will to have a fiery fever and a burning sensation. Countless octopus tentacles of spiritual force, supported by the power of the flames, rushed out of the room and rushed towards the shadow energy from all directions. 2 incorporeal and strange energies collided in the air and strangled each other. As soon as the shadow force, which had extremely strong corrosive properties, came into contact with the strange burning power of the spiritual tentacles, all sorts of indescribable and strange sounds rang out in the void. The 2 completely different energies continuously collided, strangled, and frantically devoured each other, annihilating each other. The entire void was stirred into a mess by the 2 forces, boiling and tumbling like boiling water. The shadow energy relied on the hundreds of shadow vortexes that were constantly spitting out dark energy. After a few hours of preparation, they had an absolute advantage in terms of numbers. Once they sensed the existence of the strange energy, all the dark energy in the shadow domain began to crazily gather towards Grimm's location. Grimm, on the other hand, was completely relying on his own strength to fight against the shadow domain. His powerful spiritual force spread out and turned into hundreds and thousands of spiritual tentacles, quickly and effectively strangling the shadow energy that dared to rush into his spiritual perception range. Every time the threads of spiritual force that were burned red by the power of the law of fire collided with the shadow energy, the power of both sides would disperse and destroy each other with completely different attributes. Overall, Grimm's power of the Law of Fire was much stronger than Dark, with Shunny's spontaneous shadow energy. Almost every strand of flame energy required more than 10 times the shadow energy to destroy. If it was not for the support of the shadow domain, Dark Witch Shunny would have long been defeated in the first round of spiritual force confrontation. Dark Witch Shunny's room was pitch black. It was as if the room had been flooded by the ink of thousands of cuttlefish. There was not the slightest trace of light in the dark, and no spiritual force could penetrate it to find out what was going on inside. As for the Dark Witch Shunny, she was like the Black Widow entrenched in the center of the spiderweb. She relied on the feedback of the shadow power to grasp the situation in the entire shadow-like domain without missing a single detail. To be honest, before she attacked, she did not take this legendary fire witch seriously at all. Legendary Fire Witch. What a ridiculous title. Could it be that Grimm was so stupid that he didn't realize that the reason why his enemies were so willing to spread this name for him was just for the sake of praising him to death? All magi were arrogant, and their self-esteem was extremely twisted when interacting with them. The title of Legendary Fire, which would not only not win their respect, it would also naturally arouse their hostility and hurt their sensitive self-esteem. As a conservative member of the Northern Witches, Shunny's impression of those arrogant magi was even worse, especially when she heard that the Magus had taken advantage of the rise of the Fate clan to win over and capture the heart of the young and ignorant new leader of the Fate Witches. Shunny's hatred for Grimm grew stronger and stronger. Therefore, when the will unexpectedly descended, Shunny gladly accepted the mission. She came to the Morian Plain not for the task of attacking the Arcane Kingdom, but to kill the legendary Fire Witch. Shunny did not participate in the battle that happened a few days ago, but she did not stay away. She had been looking for an opportunity to kill in one blow. Unfortunately, the power sent by the Arcane Kingdom was still too weak. It did not really threaten the strength of a level 4 wizard. So she had to choose to remain dormant and continue to follow the team. To her surprise, the legendary Fire, which did not take the opportunity to escape after perceiving her murderous intent. Instead, he brought the team to this desolate and remote corner. It seemed that he wanted to settle his personal grievances there. Shunny, who was ecstatic, did not hesitate. She immediately used the Shadow Pearl and used herself as a beacon to project some of the power of the Dark Witch's origin tower. At this time, Shunny was like a bridge, continuously projecting the power of the origin tower into the town, and then dispatching a team of elite Shadow Legion. This force did not belong to Shunny, but was a foreign legion raised and cultivated by the entire Dark Witches in the Shadow World. And Shunny's ability to mobilize them will undoubtedly show the basic attitude of the entire Dark Witches on the matter of strangling Grimm. While commanding and mobilizing the power of shadows to surround the legendary Fire Witch, Shunny communicated with the Origin Tower, trying to pull the shadow-like domain deeper into the Shadow World. But as soon as the battle between the two sides began, the situation in front of her made her frown. That legendary Fire Witch's power is too strange. How is it possible that even the extension of the spiritual power has a trace of the strange flame power? How'd he do it? According to the information from that lord, didn't he just reach Tier 4? How can he control the power of the Law of Fire? Even with Shunny's talent, having been a Tier 4 Dark Witch for more than 600 years, she had only scratched the surface of the Law of Shadows. She still had a long way to go before she could familiarize herself with the power of shadows. But the other party had only reached Tier 4 a little over a decade ago. This strange discovery made Shunny's heart burn with hatred. Since the power of shadows couldn't invade the other party's domain, she had to use something more practical. Under Shunny's command, the Shadow Legion that had infiltrated the town and chosen to lay low finally moved out. Like pouring pitch-black ink into a puddle of black water, groups of shadow leopards pounced out from various hidden corners, leaping through the shadows of houses, trees, and fences as if they were flying. They quickly surrounded the bedroom Grimm was in. Meanwhile, The high-level shadow creatures with intelligence quickly gathered together and formed a shadow warrior corps. They began to pounce on the blazing sun in an orderly manner. That's right. In the eyes of the shadow creatures, there was a surging and oppressive sun hidden in the crude house. Golden rays of light pierced through the wooden planks and the inky shadow-like domain, shining on the swarming shadow leopards. In less than 3 flicks of a finger, a Tier 2 shadow leopard would disintegrate under the golden sunlight, turning back into a mass of mindless shadow energy. Hence, rather than saying that the shadow leopard were desperately besieging the target, it was more accurate to say that they were digging their own graves like moths to a flame. If the legendary fire wizard had only lit a candle, it would have been engulfed by the darkness sooner or later under the onslaught of the shadow creatures. However, if the legendary fire, which had not ignited a candle flame, but a prairie fire instead, what awaited the shadow creatures was not victory, but... Chapter 1096. Before the Shadow Legion was dispatched, the battle between Grimm and the Dark Witch Shunny could be considered a secret battle. However, with the appearance of the Shadow Legion, the battle quickly turned into a war. War naturally had its own unique appearance and means. A huge scarlet sun rose from the inside of the wooden house, radiating endless light and heat, scorching the nearby space until it cracked. However, it was a pity that this place had turned into a shadow-like domain, and no matter how powerful the light and heat were, they were limited to a range of 100 meters. Hence, this huge fireball with a diameter of 10 meters could only illuminate the space within 100 meters. Beyond that, it was still a pitch-black world. Shunny, who was hiding in the core of darkness, raised her head and looked through the blinding light and heat with her extraordinary vision to see the situation inside the huge fireball. The legendary fire wizard stood in the air with a fiery red fire coral staff in his hand and a strangely shaped magic crown on his head. His waist, arms, neck, and feet were all glowing in red, forming a dark red magic barrier that lingered around him. His exposed hands were also covered with the strange rings that Ling Lang had seen before, and each of them emitted a strange energy wave that was completely different from the others. As for the legendary fire wizard himself, his entire body was emitting terrifying light and heat, and his body was surrounded by a strange golden flame that was daunting to look at. Due to the interference of such a powerful aura, even Shunny could not see the other party's face clearly with her vision and senses. Meanwhile, the mental strength tentacles that she had used to sneak into the light and heat domain were also completely incinerated after a sizzling sound. Damn it! How can I lock onto my target when I can't extend my mental strength? Dark Witch Shunny roared furiously and immediately drove the Shadow Legion to launch a fierce attack on the fireball. As soon as she gave the order, the Shadow Legion moved. Hundreds and thousands of shadow leopards darted out from various hidden places and leaped high and low as they pounced on the Shadow Legion. Grimm, who was standing in the light, quickly scanned the battlefield and revealed a faint smile on his face that was surrounded by flames. Along with a deep and quick incantation, a dozen 50-meter-long, 1-meter-thick flaming tentacles suddenly extended out of the ball of light that covered an area of a few hundred meters, waving rapidly in the air like an octopus. All the shadow leopards that rushed to the side of the light ball were sent flying by the flame tentacles before they could even enter the burning domain. The violent flame energy that was soaked in the flame tentacles was transmitted into the body of the shadow leopards, causing them to spontaneously combust into a bunch of beautiful fireworks. A Grade 2 shadow leopard was enough to cause a huge disaster in a small human kingdom. However, in a Tier 4 battlefield like this, they could only rely on their numbers to serve as cannon fodder. Under normal circumstances, these shadow leopards could rely on their untraceable shadow leap to directly appear in the enemy's shadow. Whether it was attacking or dodging, they had the absolute advantage. But today, they had met their most terrifying natural enemy. Under the cover of the huge ball of light, where could he find shelter or a place to stand? Thus, no matter how powerful the shadow leopard was, it would still be forced to reveal itself outside the sphere of light. And this short pause brought disaster to them. The dozen or so flame tentacles weren't just for decoration. They also possessed unfathomable power and incredible agility. As long as the shadow leopards appeared in the attack range, before they could enter the light ball, they would be smashed into pieces by the flame tentacles. So many shadow leopards tried to break in from all angles, but without exception, they were all intercepted. They couldn't even touch the edge of the light ball. And this obviously made Shunny, who was behind the scenes, even more angry and impatient. After all, this was not the sorcerer world, but the Morian plane dominated by arcanists. With Shunny's strength, she still needed the power of the Shadow Pearl and the help of the Dark Witch's origin tower to pull this small town into the intersection of the plane world and the Shadow Realm. And the price of doing so was naturally consuming the shadow power stored in the origin tower every minute and second. So, if Shunny didn't want the Dark Witch's power to weaken, it was undoubtedly a wise choice to end the battle quickly. But at this moment, she truly understood how difficult it was to deal with the legendary fire wizard. Even with the Shadow Leopard core, they couldn't even get close to him. This was simply too unexpected. With a heart full of hatred and anger, under Shunny's command, a group of Tier 3 Shadow Warriors slowly approached the huge ball of light. And behind the Shadow Warriors, two strange shadows with illusory bodies were constantly shooting shadow arrows at the ball of light. Although most of these shadow arrows were blown up by the flame tentacles, there were still some that slipped through the blockade and pierced the ball of light. As soon as they came into contact with the ball of light, these shadow arrows exploded on their own, like ink spat out by a cuttlefish. Everything in contact with the surrounding was infected with the power of darkness. Fire and darkness were two types of power that reinforced and restrained each other. Therefore, their encounter also caused the fireball to shake and break continuously. With this bit of power of darkness as a stepping stone, the Shadow Leopards immediately relied on their innate ability, Shadow Leap, to break through the blockade of the flame tentacles and appeared at the edge of the ball of light. With their Grade 2 strength, they couldn't even withstand the attack of the flame tentacles. So how could they resist the burning of the burning domain? As a result, the Shadow Leopards that charged into the ball of light exploded into a black fog that filled the sky before they could even see the situation clearly. If there were only a few Shadow Leopards, the black fog would quickly melt under the endless light and heat, disappearing without a trace. But when the endless number of Shadow Leopards exploded in the ball of light, layer after layer of black fog appeared and dissipated. A dark spot that was visible to the naked eye appeared on the red and white ball of light. Moreover, as the Shadow Leopards continued to advance, the dark spot continued to expand and showed signs of invading. This scene made Grim, who was high up in the fireball, frown slightly. Right now, he was surrounded by 3 layers of flame protection. The innermost layer was the burning fireball, which was made up of golden flames. This was also his close-range defense. The middle layer was the light formed by the fusion of the burning fireball and the burning domain. This was the middle layer of defense. The outermost layer was the flaming tentacles formed by fire spells. They were all controlled by the I chip and would not leave any gaps for the enemy to attack. However, Grim was only using his own strength to fight against the shadow-like domain. Hence, when the enemy launched an all-out attack, this seemingly flawless defensive fire was still penetrated by the enemy. Faced with the enemy's all-out attack, Grim did not panic at all. To be honest, this battle was just a warm-up before the real battle. Using the strength of the Shadow Legion to pry open Grim's defenses would at most make him look a little pathetic, but they would not be able to harm him. Hence, if the enemy wanted to deal a fatal blow, the Grade 4 Dark Witch would have to do it herself. After all, the enemy of a Grade 4 Magus could only be another Grade 4 Magus. These dazzling attacks and the wave of Shadow Legion were just cannon fodder to pave the way for the Grade 4 Dark, which to gain a slight advantage in battle. On a Grade 4 battlefield, they would never become the main characters of the battle. Hence, even though there were many Shadow Leopards, Grim still placed 60% of his attention on the 2 troublesome Grade 4 Shadow Leopards. Another 30% was placed on the dark witch Shunny, who had yet to appear, and the remaining 10% was used to deal with the shadow creatures. Is the enemy trying to suppress me with numbers? Grim, who was hiding in the golden fireball, chuckled. He raised the flaming coral staff in his hand, and a tall and majestic flaming gate immediately formed behind him. In the past, Grim would only need to expend a small amount of flame energy to summon such a flaming gate. After all, there were countless fire elemental energy in the air that he could summon to reduce the consumption of his flames. But in this kind of shadow domain, all other elemental powers were repelled except for shadow energy. Hence, the summoning of the flaming gate was almost entirely supported by Grim's own fire energy. If not for the law core in his body, he wouldn't have been able to afford such a cost. However, with the core of law providing him with a steady stream of powerful golden flames, Grim was able to summon a huge flaming gate without much effort. As the flame gate burst open, countless flame creatures swarmed out, roaring and pouncing on the shadowy creatures outside the light sphere. Compared to the elite Shadow Legion that the Dark Witches had painstakingly created, these flaming creatures were much weaker. Not only were there very few high-tiered flaming creatures, but most of the flaming creatures were Tier 1. With such numbers and quality, it would be wishful thinking for these flaming creatures to contend with the elite Shadow Legion. However, Grim did not place too much thought on these flaming creatures. He only hoped that they could hold back the annoying shadow leopards for a while. This way, Grim would be able to focus on dealing with the 2-tier 4 shadow leopards. Chapter 1097. Relying on the endless stream of fire creatures to defend against the Shadow Army's invasion, Grim was finally able to deal with the 2 wretched and cowardly Tier 4 shadows. Despite being Tier 4 creatures, the 2 of them did not have the demeanor of a powerhouse. They hid behind the Tier 3 shadow warriors and attacked the ball of light with shadow arrows, tearing open a path for the low-level shadow creatures to enter the ball of light. As for themselves, they did not dare to approach the ball of light. However, if they thought that they would be safe by hiding further away, they had underestimated Grim's methods. After all, a legendary fire wizard was famous for his ferocious elemental attacks. Grim stood within the ball of fire and sneered. The golden flames in his body began to gather. At this moment, his eyes seemed to be burning with scarlet flames that were half a meter long. His long black hair hung loosely behind him, and balls of strange flames danced on it. His entire body was wrapped in violent and ferocious flames, constantly emitting shocking light and heat. With my anger as the power, light of blazing flames, Grim roared out the incantation to activate a fire spell. His eyes, which were already burning with flames, suddenly lit up with 2 blinding red rays of light. They then converged into 2 terrifying beams of light that streaked across the sky, pierced through the army of shadow creatures, and landed on one of the Tier 4 shadows. A mournful howl tore through the clouds. The Tier 4 shadow released a thick layer of frozen death aura, desperately blocking the beams of light from penetrating its body. It then fled frantically in all directions. Unfortunately, no matter how fast it fled, it could not outrun Grim's gaze. Grim stood as still as a mountain, looking like a mighty god of fire. His pair of scarlet eyes followed the fleeing shadow as he adjusted the angle and direction of his gaze. No matter how the shadow tried to escape, the 2 beams of light were firmly locked onto its body. The frozen death aura and the scarlet light from the Tier 4 shadow clashed, devouring and destroying each other in a frenzy. But judging from the current situation, it was obvious that the intensity of the crimson rays from Grim's eyes was a notch higher. While devouring and annihilating the freezing air of death, they were also corroding Shadow's body and inching closer to the dark core within the half-real, half-incorporeal body. The dark core was where the soul and consciousness of creatures like ghastly Shadow resided. Once this place was destroyed, even if Shadow was a Grade 4 monster, it would be hard for him to survive. As a result, the Tier 4 Shadow was scared out of its wits, fleeing for its life. Shadow leap, shadow shuttle, darkness substitution, shadow clone. A series of darkness-attributed spells were cast. He would either suddenly flash to another area, swap places with a shadow life form, or split into several dozen clones that looked exactly like him. However, no matter what it did, the two blazing lights seemed to have locked onto it and never left its body. The cold air of death was actually its body, and the dark core was where its soul was. Therefore, as the frozen death aura rapidly melted, the shadow's body began to shrink bit by bit until the frozen death aura could no longer wrap around the black jelly-like dark core. The moment the blazing lights shone on the dark core, the Tier 4 shadow stopped fleeing. Its entire body began to distort and transform, taking the form of the countless creatures it had devoured before. In the end, with a crisp sound of glass exploding, two small holes were drilled out of the dark core. Countless pale and miserable phantoms of souls escaped from the inside and danced around the shadow in the sky. Then, they dissipated in the air one after another. Target has died. Requesting removal of lock. The AI chip's voice sounded in Grimm's mind. Remove lock. Yes. If Grimm had relied on himself, it would have been impossible for him to lock onto a Tier 4 shadow that possessed multiple teleportation abilities from a distance of a kilometer. However, with the help of the AI chip, he could burn a Tier 4 shadow to death with his golden flames without moving an inch. His display of invincible might this time had undoubtedly shocked all of his enemies. The remaining Tier 4 shadow was scared out of its wits. It no longer dared to approach the blazing ball of fire, shrieking as it fled into the depths of the darkness. A Tier 4 creature. That was a Tier 4 creature. Although the strength of a Tier 4 creature could not be compared to that of a true Tier 4 magus, it was still a Tier 4 creature. Even in a one-on-one fight, most Tier 4 magi could suppress or defeat a Tier 4 creature, but killing one was extremely difficult. After all, the basic strength of a Tier 4 creature was clear for all to see. Although they could not compare to Tier 4 magi in terms of knowledge, usage, and the popularity of magic equipment, they were not the slightest bit inferior to Tier 4 magi in terms of their various terrifying abilities. However, a terrifying Tier 4 shadow had actually been burned to death by the legendary fire shaman before it could even display most of its power. This was too inconceivable. However, with this, the legendary fire shaman's frightening methods caused all the high-rank shadow creatures present to feel insecure. They stared at the dazzling ball of light in horror, but they could not see anything inside. For no reason, the attacks of the high-ranked shadow creatures could not help but weaken, trying their best to not be so eye-catching. It was a pity that no matter how they tried to hide and disguise themselves, the huge ball of light still fired out terrifying beams of light, incinerating 7 or 8 Tier 3 shadow warriors into a pile of ash. This kind of behavior caused the Tier 4 Dark Witch Shunny, who was overseeing the situation, to feel her heart break. Although nurturing a high-ranked shadow creature was not as difficult as nurturing a high-ranked magus, the amount of resources and various rare materials consumed was also extremely shocking. The high-ranked shadow creatures that the legendary fire shaman had slaughtered were all elite subordinates that the Dark Witch faction had spent a lot of effort and resources to nurture. Now, they had been thrown into this foreign plane for nothing, yet they did not bring any benefits to the family. This was an unforgivable waste. If Shunny was the leader of the Dark Witch faction, such extravagant squandering of the family's assets would not attract much criticism. But now she was not. At most, she was just a high-ranked witch sent by the Dark Witch faction to carry out an interplanar hunting mission. The leader had only authorized her to use a portion of the Origin Tower's power and a limited number of the family's private forces. However, this did not include the heavy losses of the private forces. Looking at the high-ranked shadow creatures turning to ashes under the crimson light, Shunny could almost imagine the terrifying scene of the elders besieging and criticizing her during the next family meeting. Those bastards would definitely make her use her personal resources to make up for this mistake. This was definitely going to happen. Shunny's heart was bleeding, and she no longer had the mood to watch over the rear. She hurriedly summoned the remaining Tier 4 Shadow Warrior to replace her as the guiding force of the Origin Tower. She, on the other hand, was enveloped by a huge wave of darkness as she arrived at the front lines of the war. The Dark Witch Shani had finally shown herself. Inside the fireball, a smile finally appeared on Grimm's face, and he quickly began to adjust his condition. A fireball and a black ball, two powerful magi with distinct attributes, faced off against each other. Their gazes locked onto each other. Beep. Target's initial position has been locked on. Target's attribute is darkness, and it has shadow shuttle, shadow leap, and many other short-distance movement techniques. Within a shadow-like domain, the probability of locking on to the target's position is less than 23%. Dynamic trajectory blurring calculation online. Lock-on ability increased to 46%. Elemental vision assistance system online. Lock-on ability increased to 62%. Scanning of spatial nodes completed. Lock-on ability increased to 71%. Reminder, this is the optimal result for the current ability. Unless the host can break through the shadow-like domain, the lock-on ability will be affected by external factors. 71%. That was enough. Grimm's eyes flickered. It had to be known that he was currently facing a mid-ranked Dark which had advanced several hundred years ago. For the AI chip to be able to increase the lock-on ability to 71% in a shadow-like domain that his opponent had painstakingly set up was already an inconceivable situation. In a battle between two rank 4 magi, whether or not they could use their spells on their opponent was the key to victory. Due to the existence of defensive force fields, displacement spells, and defensive spells, as well as the influence of the environment, it was almost impossible to lock onto the opponent's position and smash all the spells onto the opponent's body. Not being able to lock on to the opponent meant that there was a high chance that their spells would miss, wasting precious wizard power and opportunities to attack. That was the most unforgivable. With the help of the AI chip, Grimm could lock on to the Dark Witch Shani's position to 71%. This was an extremely terrifying number. On the other hand, if the Dark Witch wanted to lock on to Grimm, her chances of success would be less than 30%. If it were an outsider, it would be hard to imagine the increase in battle strength that would be brought about by this reversal. It's a pity that you Dark Witches still chose to oppose me. Today, I'll give you a chance. Let's see if you die or if I live. Grimm laughed coldly, his thunderous voice causing the entire shadow-like domain to tremble. Shani, who was standing in the large black shadows, chuckled coldly. It's not up to you to decide what we Dark Witches choose. Today, you'll stay here forever. Along with Shani's declaration of war, the dark energy in the shadow-like domain suddenly came to life and pounced towards Grimm, who was standing in the golden flames from all directions. Chapter 1098. Grimm looked around at the massive, dark energy that covered the sky and covered the earth. He was well aware that this wasn't the Dark Witch's own power. She could transform this space into a shadow-like domain all by herself. It was unimaginable without the help of the Wizard's Pagoda. The Dark Witch would undoubtedly enjoy a huge boost in battle power if she fought here. However, the outcome of the battle was still determined by the basic abilities of both parties, as well as their fighting techniques and methods. In this aspect, the Dark Witch still had a huge advantage. 500 years of fighting was enough for her to accumulate a wealth of killing experience that rookies could never hope to achieve. These are the most fundamental reasons why she had been able to maintain her lofty position all this time. When the Dark Witch Shani walked step by step toward Grimm, her body, heartbeat, and breath resonated strongly with the shadow-like domain. At this moment, her body and consciousness had completely disappeared. She had completely fused with the endless darkness that covered the sky and covered the earth. Damn it, there really isn't a single level 4 wizard that's easy to deal with. Grimm cursed in his heart as he detonated the flaming tentacles around him without hesitation. As the wild flame explosion blasted the shadow creatures into pieces, the subsequent flame shockwaves pushed back the dark forces that were surging in from all directions like a violent storm. With the help of the shockwaves, the flame energy and shadow energy exploded in the center of the town and began to entangle and annihilate each other. The dark witch Shunny, who had just fused with the shadow-like domain, was forced out by the explosion of the domain before she could use it to attack Grim. As soon as her slender figure appeared from the shadows, the detestable legendary fire wizard charged toward her with a boundless sea of flames. Bastard, how did this guy know how to deal with the domain energy? Shunny cursed angrily as she waved her hand to block the approaching Grim with hundreds of shadow arrows. After all, this shadow-like domain was supported by the Origin Tower, and it was not a part of her own power. As such, Shunny's compatibility with this domain was not very high. That was why she was shaken out by an energy shockwave that affected the entire space. Honestly speaking, Xia and I had to look at the fire wizard in a different light now that he possessed such a technique. Looking at the legendary fire wizard charging towards her, Shunny disappeared into the endless darkness in a flash. In the next second, the place where she was just standing was engulfed by a blazing fireball. Damn it! She ran away again. Grim could not help but curse in a low voice as he sensed the life force within the explosion. For a long time, Grim's favorite tactic in a wizard battle was to spread and expand the sea of flames without restraint, creating a huge battlefield for himself to come and go as he pleased. But today, being trapped in this shadow-like domain, he tasted the bitterness of entering someone else's home field. In this shadow-like domain, the Dark Witch had unlimited space to jump and shuttle back and forth. As long as she willed it, she could appear anywhere in the domain at any time. Using this advantage, she could sneak up on Grim like a ghost. When Grim wanted to retaliate, she had already slipped away to another area. Hence, in this one-way transparent domain, Grim could not display his full strength. If not for the AI chip barely being able to track the Dark Witch's movements, Grim would have fallen into an awkward situation where he could not retaliate. Watching the Dark Witch quickly disappear in front of him, Grim's black pupils flashed with blue light. The originally dark world suddenly turned into an extremely monotonous gray world. His entire field of vision was filled with dark gray energy that flowed freely. In this gray world, a red trace that was slowly dissipating could be clearly seen. Grim did not hesitate to push away the entangling shadow energy and quickly chased after the red trace. Nearly 1,000 meters away, the Dark Witch Shunny had just traversed through the shadow world and was still using shadow energy to find and lock onto the legendary fire wizard's position. However, before she could receive any feedback from the domain, a violent, blazing fireball shook the void and flew towards her in a beautiful arc. Shunny, who was completely unprepared, hastily blocked the explosive impact of the swift and violent fireball. Only then did she realize that the legendary fire wizard was already in front of her with a terrifying aura. Damn it! How did that wizard find me? With a strong sense of resentment, Shunny could only escape into the void again. Using the dark nodes, she quickly emerged from the other side of the domain. This time, she had finally learned her lesson and did not pour all of her spiritual force into her control of the domain. As expected, less than 3 seconds after she emerged from the dark nodes, the wizard once again charged towards her with a boundless aura. At this point, the Dark Witch Shunny was completely sure that the wizard had used some unknown method to lock onto her position. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Without the advantage of her home field, what was the use of this shadow-like domain that she had spent so much effort to create? She could not possibly let the wizard chase her all over the domain like a game of whack-a-mole, right? Shunny was unwilling to give up, so she tried a few more times before she completely gave up. That bastard actually had a way to track her in this shadow-like domain. Although this was a little unbelievable, Shunny could only helplessly accept the fact that there were all kinds of strange and bizarre witchcraft in the wizard system. After emerging from another dark node, Shunny did not choose to hide. Instead, She quickly mobilized the shadow energy and began to seriously prepare for battle. She, Shunny, was a dark witch who had been promoted for 500 years. She did not rely on trickery to get to where she was today. If she really wanted to fight, her title of Night Crow Shunny was not just for show. Sensing the agitation and vibrations of the shadow energy around her, Shunny quickly determined the direction and angle of the legendary fire wizard. With a quick and clear incantation, countless shadow energy that was originally flowing around suddenly gathered together and condensed into a huge dark core. Then, 7 to 8 strange shadow tentacles that were as tall as 3-story buildings suddenly extended out of the core and waved around aimlessly. When the legendary fire wizard swooped down with a huge fireball, all the shadow tentacles reached out and firmly tied him to the ground like an octopus. When the shadow tentacles and the huge fireball came into contact, a series of small energy explosions immediately erupted in the battlefield. The high temperature and light of the fireball continuously melted the shadow tentacles, causing them to soften like melted ice cream. However, the shadow energy that surged in from the surroundings caused the huge dark core to produce new tentacles, forcefully stopping Grimm. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity, the Level 2 and Level 3 shadow creatures stepped out of the endless darkness and madly attacked the ball of light around Grimm's body. Every bit of dark energy penetrated and attacked the ball of light, causing it to vibrate nonstop. Grimm, who was inside the ball of light, could clearly feel the frequency and magnitude of each vibration. In Grimm's hands, blazing fireballs were shot out like cannonballs. Almost every fireball could kill a Level 2 or heavily injure a Level 3 shadow creature. Even if the shadow warriors chose to defend while attacking, they could not stop the violent flames from penetrating the ball of light. Once the core of darkness was destroyed, no shadow creature would be able to maintain its projection in another plane of existence. After all, after mastering the law of fire, Grimm's ability to penetrate flames was one of the best even among elemental wizards. Moreover, the shadow creatures that Grimm killed with his own hands in the Shadow Realm were also burned to ashes by the sudden burst of flames. Of course, Shunny, who was still fighting hard, did not know about this. Otherwise, the pain in her heart would have increased by more than 10 times. Why were shadow creatures so difficult to deal with? It was because they were very good at using shadow energy to project their power. That was why, while their power projections fought in the other planes without fear of sacrifice, their true bodies continued to survive in the Shadow Realm as stable as Mount Tai. Even if they died or sacrificed themselves, they only needed to spend some of their spiritual force to project their own power again. It was precisely because of this strange characteristic of shadow creatures that they became terrifying existences that all flesh and blood creatures did not want to face. However, they had met their nemesis when they met Grimm. With the help of the powerful law of fire, the dead shadow creatures would bring back a portion of the power of fire during the feedback process. In this way, their main body in the Shadow Realm, which was the core of darkness, would be instantly destroyed by the power of fire. This was the most terrifying thing about Wizards of Law. When they used the lever of law to pry open the power system, they could often use an extremely small amount of power to cause terrifying damage to their enemies. Moreover, using the power of law to attack and harm the enemy was almost unstoppable. Unless you had a similar power of law to protect yourself, you could only suffer in silence. Chapter 1099. Shunny, who was in close combat with Grimm, quickly sensed that something was wrong. Through her mental perception, she could sense that the number of shadow creatures in the shadow-like domain was decreasing rapidly. Logically speaking, this shouldn't be happening. With the Origin Tower calling out to them from afar and the Tier 4 shadow guiding them, the shadow creatures should be pouring in endlessly, flooding the battlefield with their frightening numbers and fearless fighting style. But how long had the battle been going on? The Origin Tower suddenly cut off the shadow creature's teleportation route, causing the shadow army in the shadow-like domain to dwindle. It looked like they were about to be annihilated by the enemy. Damn it! What are those sisters doing in the rear? Could it be that something went wrong somewhere? Shani could not help but feel doubtful. Little did she know that in the distant Sorcerer World's northern Dark Witch's origin tower, Leader Cersei was already hopping mad and vomiting 3 liters of blood. The shadow army that the Dark Witches had painstakingly nurtured was inexplicably annihilated. As they projected their dark powers to the strange plane hundreds of millions of miles away, the bodies they left in the Shadow Valley were burned to ashes one by a flame that suddenly emerged. Faced with such a terrifying discovery, Leader Cersei had no choice but to cut off the sole passage between the Shadow Army and the distant Morian Plain, barely preserving the remaining 20% of the Shadow Army's strength. Afterward, looking at the sparse Shadow Army and the severely injured Shadow Army, Leader Cersei wanted to cry, but no tears came out. She could only angrily curse the bastard who had given her the wrong information. Although the Dark Witch's drastic measures had saved the Shadow Army's last flesh and blood, they had also harmed Shani, who was still fighting on the front lines. The shadow-like domain shook silently. After the soul passage was cut off, the Tier 4 shadow that was guiding the Origin Tower in the heart of darkness naturally dissipated. Meanwhile, without Shadow Soul Beacon, the Origin Tower had lost its ability to project power to the outside world. With this, even the shadow-like domain was in danger. It should be noted that at this moment, a part of Shani's consciousness had been fused with the shadow-like domain. Now that the shadow-like domain had collapsed, if her consciousness could not withdraw in time, her soul would most likely suffer great damage. Therefore, when Shani felt the tremors and power of the shadow-like domain fading away, she was instantly scared out of her wits. She couldn't care less about fighting Grimm anymore. She desperately escaped from the battlefield and rushed to the Dark Core. Unfortunately, how could Grimm, who had also sensed the danger of the shadow-like domain, let her escape so easily? He immediately chased after her, not giving her the chance to regain control of the Heart of Darkness. In an almost endless space of darkness, Grimm strode forward, holding the flaming coral staff in his right hand, which was glowing with a dense red light, and constantly fired fireballs at the shadow energy around him, blowing it up. The Dark Witch Shani's elemental aura was faintly discernible in front of him, pointing him in the right direction. As soon as he followed the elemental aura into a dark node, Grimm's expression changed. He took a step back and raised his wand high. A fiery barrier that was glowing with red light quickly formed. Grimm's expression changed slightly as he followed the elemental aura into a node of darkness. He took a step back and raised his staff high, forming a flaming barrier that glowed with red light. However, under the infusion of Grimm's powerful flame force, the thin but incomparably tough flame barrier was able to withstand the terrifying trap that Dark Witch Shani had set for him. The shadow energy that had been flowing freely around his body had become much thinner and poorer after such a torment. The suppression on Grimm's flame force was also greatly reduced. Grimm coughed lightly as he walked out of the chaotic explosion. His eyes flashed with blue light as he scanned the surroundings. However, it was a pity that the violent explosion had destroyed all traces here. It was no longer feasible for him to use the elemental aura to track Shani. Hey, Chip, can you lock onto the elemental aura? Grimm asked in a low voice. Beep. The surrounding elemental auras have been completely disrupted, unable to lock onto a target. Is there any other way to catch up to her? Beep. Based on the analysis of the current situation, there's a 97% chance that the Dark Witch is heading towards the Darkness Core. The location of the Darkness Core is currently being calculated and simulated. Beep. The location of the Darkness Core has been determined. Please move in the indicated direction. Immediately after, an illusory light blue arrow was projected onto Grimm's retina. Grimm charged forward without hesitation. The illusory arrowhead kept changing directions, guiding Grimm forward. This did not mean that the Darkness Core was constantly moving, but that it was a special characteristic of the Shadow Domain. The shadow domain enveloped Maplewood Town and the surrounding land for thousands of meters. Such a large area was more than enough for a normal person to use as a battlefield. However, for two Grade 4 Magi, this battlefield was simply too small. With just a blink or leap, the two Magi would be able to rush out of the battlefield. Hence, in order to trap Grimm here, the shadow domain had the strange spatial characteristics of a magic lock. This way, even if Grimm flipped the heavens and earth upside down, he would not be able to escape from the shadow domain. In this shadow-like domain, even if you were flying or running with your eyes closed, you would only be crashing around in a strange arc. The sense of space and time within the shadow domain was chaotic, causing people to unknowingly circle around a strange core. The power of this domain lay in the fact that it did not affect one's sight, hearing, touch, or taste, but one's soul. Even if one were to circle around it for tens of thousands of years, one would not realize that they were not walking in a straight line, but in a strange arc instead. Hence, while Grimm followed the Chip's instructions and constantly changed directions, his body was actually walking in a straight line towards the dark witch Shunny's room. That's right, the darkness core was not hidden. It was simply set up in Shunny's room. It was only due to the existence of the domain that Grimm could not sense its existence. Of course, it was impossible for him to get close. Grimm's eyes flickered with blue light. With the Chip's powerful computing ability, it projected two different visions in his left and right eyes. In the vision of his left eye, Grimm was standing in a dark void, stumbling around like a blind man. In his right eye, he was in the stone plaza of Maplewood Town. His surroundings were filled with the miserable scene of a fire spell wreaking havoc. One on the left and one on the right, one real and one fake. If not for the Chip not being affected by the power of the domain, Grimm would have been passively attacked by the dark witch in the shadow domain. Grimm walked along the scorched stone street toward a small wooden building in the distance. In the entire Maplewood Town, this was the only building that was still intact. Crossing the street, he arrived in front of the building. The two thick doors were wide open, and Grimm could faintly feel Shunny's life force on them. It seemed that Shunny had used her hands to push them away when she was rushing back here. Grimm walked in and stood in the middle of the hall on the first floor. In front of him was the winding staircase that led to the second floor. On his left, the door to the dining hall was wide open. Chiolicia was anxiously sitting on a chair, her head tilted to the side as she tried to sense the changes in the surrounding elemental energy. They were only 20 meters apart, but Chiolicia did not seem to sense Grimm's presence. 20 meters. This was a distance that Grade 4 Magi could even hear. Perhaps Grimm's gaze contained a trace of power, but Chiolicia, who was waiting anxiously, suddenly trembled. She turned her head in Grimm's direction in a daze. She scanned the empty hall on the first floor a few times, but did not find anything out of the ordinary. She did not even see Grimm's figure. She could only blame it on her own paranoia. In fact, with Chiolicia and Mangle's strength, the dining hall could not possibly trap them. It was just that they were afraid of Shunny's brutality, so they did not dare to extend their power beyond the dining hall. After all, the whole Maplewood Town had become the battlefield of the legendary fire wizard and the dark witch. If they unscrupulously extended their power, it might cause some unpredictable changes in the situation. To be honest, if it was not necessary, even Wizard Holly did not want to have a direct confrontation with Shunny. Therefore, he could only lock himself in his room and restrain his power. This was a practical way of expressing his will not to participate in the battle between the two Grade 4 Magi. Of course, Wizard Holly and the double-headed wizard were not just waiting for death. They were just using their own power to defend themselves. If the Dark Witch dared to extend her shadow power to them, they would naturally have additional means to protect themselves. However, if that happened, the Dark Witch's plan to fight the legendary fire wizard alone would be doomed. Therefore, even though Grimm and Shunny were fighting fiercely, Wizard Holly's room and the dining hall where the double-headed wizard was in were still as quiet as before. Chapter 1100. The corridor was quiet and dark. The old wooden floorboards creaked under his feet. The air was filled with a suffocating shadow aura. As he got closer and closer to the core of darkness, Grimm's flame aura was greatly suppressed. It could only extend half a meter out of his body, barely enough to protect his body and clothes. In Grimm's eyes, the corridor in front of him was comparable to a haunted house. Strands and strands of shadowy energy drifted out from the second room on the left, slowly floating in the corridor. As the shadow aura was too dense, these strange shadows seemed to show signs of coming to life. They wriggled and floated in the narrow corridor, constantly twisting into all kinds of strange shapes. From afar, they seemed like terrifying demons that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as they waited for their prey to come knocking on their door. As soon as Grimm stepped into the dark corridor, the shadow closest to him suddenly turned into a huge mouth full of sharp teeth, biting at him fiercely. Grimm snorted lightly. His right hand that was wrapped in flames shot out like lightning and pierced into the strange mouth. No matter how hard the other party bit and grinded, it was unable to penetrate the flame barrier and hurt his arm in the slightest. Grimm's hand explored the inside of the strange mouth for a while. When he suddenly retracted his hand, there was a dark and shiny black crystal in his palm. After losing the black crystal, the strange mouth roared crazily for a moment before vanishing into thin air. Grimm raised the black crystal in front of his eyes, and the I chip quickly projected its basic information. Name, Shadow Fragment Type. Dark Energy Crystal Item Rank. Level 1 Usage. Enchantment can be used to add shadow damage to weapons. Alchemy, basic material for dark magic equipment. Alchemy, necessary material for magic potions that defend against shadow damage. Summoning, basic material for summoning shadow creatures. Special usage, can be used to synthesize shadow crystals. 100 shadow fragments can be converted into a shadow crystal through an alchemy ritual. There were many other uses of the shadow fragments, but Grimm was not in the mood to pay attention to them. It was just a Tier 1 sorcerer material. It was not worth it for him to spend too much effort on it. Grimm threw the shadow fragment into his storage ring and prepared to move on. Perhaps sensing the strength of the newcomer, these naturally catalyzed large clusters of shadows quickly gathered together, condensing into a strange shadow creature that was only the size of a dwarf. Its entire body was pitch black, and its facial features and body could not be seen clearly. The moment it appeared, a treacherous, unpredictable, and terrifying aura emanated from its body. The Chip's urgent warning sounded in Grimm's mind. Beep. Level 4 Shadow Creature's energy waves detected. Initial analysis indicates that it is a shadow assassin. Its threat to the host has reached the dangerous level. Please remain vigilant. So fast? Grimm was slightly startled, and his gaze fell on the door behind the shadow creature. Even if the Dark Witch Shunny was a sorcerer god, it was impossible for her to create a Tier 4 shadow creature in such a short time. Unless there was some kind of abnormally powerful shadow treasure in the dark core, it was impossible to achieve this by relying on human strength alone. If they really had treasures or tools of this level, why didn't they just use them against him? Could it be that there were restrictions on its usage, or was it purely a support item? Grimm scanned the strange creature that was rapidly forming in front of him, quickly analyzing and determining the secrets of the room. He was about to face the Dark Witch, so how could he gain the upper hand on the battlefield and see through the enemy's trump cards? This was what a high-ranked magus should do at the start of battle. However, there was not much time left for Grimm to think and analyze. Within the room, the strange energy waves from the dark core were getting stronger and clearer. No matter what terrifying attack the enemy was preparing or what powerful creature she was summoning, Grimm did not have the obligation to gentlemanly wait for her to finish. Hence, at this moment, no matter what kind of enemy stood in his way, Grimm had to flatten them with lightning speed and disrupt the Dark Witch's plan. Thinking of this, Grimm took a step forward without hesitation. The fire dragon pendant on his neck flashed red, and a terrifying stream of flames shot out from his mouth, covering the entire dark corridor in a fan shape. Of course, this included the newly catalyzed Dark Shadow Assassin. When the terrifying stream of flames broke through the barrier of darkness and swept past the surroundings of the Dark Shadow Assassin, the Dark Shadow Assassin strangely disappeared. Yes, it disappeared, not teleported. The battle just now had allowed Grimm to come into contact with various types of shadow creatures. Although they were proficient in dark magic and had mastered some strange shadow abilities, their movements were still so weak that they were almost undetectable. If not for the AI chip's help, Grimm might not have been able to capture this level of shadow leap or shadow traverse. However, when the Dark Shadow Assassin disappeared, Grimm could not detect any traces of the elemental fluctuations even if he opened his eyes wide. It was as if the Dark Shadow Assassin had instantly blended into the background, making it impossible to track it through the traces of the elemental fluctuations. The fire dragon's breath pierced through the shadows left behind by the Dark Shadow Assassin and set the entire dark corridor ablaze. However, the Dark Shadow Assassin was nowhere to be seen, and its aura was nowhere to be seen. Just as Grimm's fire dragon's breath came to an end, a short black figure silently slid out from the void behind him. The two black daggers in their hands pierced towards Grimm's back without the slightest sound or aura. With Grimm's perception as a grade 4 fire wizard, how could he not sense the strange changes happening behind him? However, although the opponent's movements seemed light and unintentional, in the eyes of an outsider, they were as fast as lightning. Moreover, the two black daggers were dull. Although Grimm could not sense any elemental aura from them, they gave off a ruthless aura, as if they were peerless weapons. Faced with the Dark Shadow Assassin, Grimm's mind raced. He did not choose to use a defensive spell on his flaming coral staff, but instead chose to attack. The two black daggers pierced through the flame barrier, pierced through the lava armor, and stabbed into Grimm's back. They shuttled back and forth between the lava and flesh, moving between the torrents of flames, slicing and churning rapidly, trying their best to deal as much damage to Grimm as possible. Grimm endured the excruciating pain and shot a beam of red light at the dark body of the Shadow Assassin. In the next second, dense fire elemental aura condensed into flame shackles in the void, binding the Dark Shadow Assassin and Grimm together. Flame shackles. It was a type of confinement-type fire spell. It could bind the enemy together, and if the enemy wanted to escape, they would have to bear 3 times the damage of the spell. Seeing that the situation was not good, the Dark Shadow Assassin no longer cared about hurting Grimm and tried to escape Grimm's side in a flash. Unfortunately, before his pitch-black body could blend into the darkness, he was dragged out by the flame shackles that were linked to his body. After 2 flashes, the Dark Shadow Assassin could not escape. It could only brandish its black daggers and slash at the flame shackles. However, this was enough for Grimm to completely lock onto its soul undulations and elemental aura. Grimm stretched out his left hand and grabbed the neck of the Dark Shadow Assassin, who could not escape. Berserk golden flames flowed along his arm and instantly spread to the Dark Shadow Assassin's body. In the next second, the Dark Shadow Assassin roared and danced around, cutting Grimm's arm into a bloody mess. Flames flew everywhere. However, no matter how serious the damage was, Grimm did not loosen his grip, and the golden flames continued to pour into the Dark Shadow Assassin's body. Finally, after 11 flicks of his fingers, the Dark Shadow Assassin could no longer endure the burning of the law flames, and with a bang, it exploded into a black mist that filled the sky. Within the black mist, a gloomy black gem fell, and Grimm caught it. Shadow Diamond. A grade 4 Shadow Diamond. This time, he could not ignore it as calmly as before. After all, grade 4 Shadow Diamonds were not easy to find even in the Magus world. If Shadow Fragments were a grade 1 Magus material, then 100 Shadow Fragments could be fused into a grade 2 Shadow Crystal. 100 grade 2 Shadow Crystals could be fused into a grade 3 Shadow Stone, and 100 grade 3 shadow stones could be fused into a grade 4 shadow diamond. Legend had it that the shadow diamond was a top-notch darkness-type Magus material. If the shadow diamond fell into Magus Holly's hands, he might be able to create a shadow puppet that could freely traverse the shadow world. It was a grade 4 darkness-type metal puppet that could hide behind its master's back and protect him at all times. If the shadow diamond fell into the hands of summoner, they could summon a grade 4 shadow dragon. The shadow dragon was pitch black, had sharp claws and shadow wings, and could spit out shadow flames. It was a strange species that was a cross between a dragon and a shadow creature. If the shadow diamond fell into the hands of a high-ranked alchemist, it would not be a problem to create a shadow scepter that could summon the entire Shadow Legion. Of course, the strength of the Shadow Legion was directly related to the alchemist's attainments in alchemy. When it came to the Shadow Diamond, the AI chip could give Grimm hundreds of suggestions on how to use it and how to maximize its value. However, now was not the time to discuss this. After all, there was still a terrifying dark witch that he had yet to deal with. Grimm kept the Shadow Diamond in satisfaction and took out a purple healing potion from his robes. He popped the cork off the bottle and swallowed it in one gulp. Only after the huge bloody hole on his back was quickly healed by the combined effects of the magic potion and his super strong physical strength did he take a step forward and gently push open the wooden door. Chapter 1101. Behind the wooden door was an endless expanse of darkness. If Grimm did not clearly understand that he was standing in front of an ordinary bedroom in an ordinary wooden building in an ordinary town, he would have suspected that he was in the vast shadow realm. In the boundless darkness, a huge dark shadow was wriggling about with its claws and fangs bared. When Grimm's gaze fell on this huge shadow, a sense of loathing arose from the depths of his heart. Enmity, undisguised enmity. When Grimm's aura appeared in this strange space, a strong sense of hostility rose from the depths of the huge shadow, and this hostility was etched into the depths of Grimm's heart. If it was a regular Magus, it would be difficult to see through the powerful and distorted shadow space outside the huge shadow. However, Grimm's eyes flickered with blue light, and with just a few flicks of his fingers, he saw everything. With the help of the AI, Chip's powerful elemental scanning, long-range vision, long-range perception, motion capture, and other strange abilities, Grimm's gaze penetrated the protective force field and saw everything in the huge shadow. The dark witch Shunny was currently standing naked in the shadow. A strange black stone floated in front of her, spewing out a huge amount of shadow energy. A portion of the shadow energy was absorbed by Shunny's body and transformed into profound and mysterious magic patterns that appeared on her body. The other part was absorbed by the dense and strange spell formations in the surroundings, transforming into a powerful shadow force that supported the huge shadow-like domain. Grimm's gaze swept past Shunny's naked body, ignoring the boundless scenery of the undulating mountains and her anxious and angry gaze. Instead, it landed on the magic patterns that were slowly appearing. Shunny's body was white and smooth, with a slim waist and perky breasts. She had everything a beautiful woman should have. However, as the huge amount of shadow energy flowed into her body, strange black patterns started to spread from her toes. At first glance, these patterns looked like the decorative patterns of a rose branch. However, when Grimm's gaze landed on them, the AI chip's rapid scanning, extraction, and magnification revealed the details of these patterns. This was not a pattern at all, but a strange rune formed by lines of fine and complicated witchcraft lines. From the large number of runes extracted by the AI chip, it could be deciphered that the Dark Witch was actually risking her own life. Using the endless shadow energy in the strange black stone as a foundation and her own body as a carrier, she wanted to project the entire tower of the Dark Witch clan in the far north of the Magus world. Once her plan succeeded, she would temporarily possess the same offensive and defensive power as the Origin Tower in this shadow-like domain. At that time, Even if the other 3 level 4 wizards joined forces, they would not be able to contend against a humanoid super wizard pagoda, much less Grim. Although this idea was crazy, looking at the black demonic pattern that had already spread to her chest, she might really succeed if she was given a quarter of an hour. After understanding the situation, Grim was both thankful and scared. Luckily, he had sensed that time was of the essence in the dark corridor, so he had given up on the orthodox method of battle and used himself as bait to lure the shadow assassin into close combat. Then, even if he had to suffer some injuries, he would still be able to kill the shadow assassin as quickly as possible. Otherwise, with the craftiness and difficulty of dealing with the shadow assassin, he might even be able to hold it off until the summoning of the wizard's pagoda succeeded. Although the Dark Witch Shunny did not have the protection of a shadow assassin, she still had a defensive force field that was difficult to deal with. This force field was not her power, but was formed by the stone that was continuously spitting out a large amount of shadow energy. In Grimm's memories, anything that could form a defensive force field was either a high-grade treasure or a wizard weapon, and it was at least 1 or 2 levels higher than the sodden divine ring in his hand. Combining the appearance and attributes of the strange black stone, a resounding name popped up in Grimm's mind: the Shadow Pearl. The reason why Grimm remembered this name was because this shadow orb was a famous rank 5 treasure, a purely support type level 5 treasure. To other magi, it was just an ordinary level 5 material, but to most dark elemental creatures, it was a godly weapon. The owner of the Shadow Pearl could communicate with the Shadow Realm at any time, and use the pearl as a bridge to summon endless shadow energy from the Shadow Realm. Moreover, the owner of the Shadow Pearl could ignore the restrictions of all dark elemental spells and control the shadow energy at will. A simple example would be the most common skill of the Dark Path, Shadow Leap. This spell could only be used when there was a shadow near the target. Without shadows, one could not leap. This was why many magi who encountered dark elemental creatures would cast illumination spells around them as quickly as possible to disperse the darkness. This way, they could prevent the dark elemental creatures from suddenly emerging from the shadows below them. However, such a tactic would be useless against the Shadow Pearl. Even in a place as bright as day, without any shadows, the owner of the Shadow Pearl would be able to move around freely, unaffected by external factors. Coupled with the reduced cooldown time, the Shadow Pearl meant that the owner of the Shadow Pearl had unlimited shadow invisibility. To most dark elemental creatures, this was a treasure that they could only dream of. Grim watched as the magical patterns on Shunny's body slowly extended past her ample breasts and towards her neck. He knew that he couldn't delay any longer. If Shunny were to really summon the power of the Darkness Origin Tower to him, he would definitely be no match for her. Therefore, after seeing everything clearly, Grim did not hesitate to transform. His body was expanding, and his consciousness was roaring. Endless golden flames surged out of the heart of the rule, combining with the crimson lava that surged out of the void, condensing into a 10-meter-tall golden flame giant. Under the infusion of the golden flames, the few magic tools that Grim used to own were manifested in a form that was half material and half energy. After all, the flame set equipment was a grade 3 magic tool that Grim had custom-made for himself. Although it could not keep up with his pace, it could still be used to a certain extent after manifesting. The only things that could really help Grim were the grade 4 sodden divine ring and the flaming coral staff. As for the rest of the magic tools, under the infusion of the golden flame, they were melted and destroyed one by one due to the fact that they couldn't bear the great power before they could turn into magic tools. After all, Grim was now a grade 4 legendary fire wizard. Those grade 2 and 3 magic tools and tools could only be used for fun, but once he stepped onto the battlefield, they could no longer withstand Grim's violent attacks. You can see me? The Dark Witch, Shunny, seemed to only realize this problem at this moment. She clamped her legs together in embarrassment, covering her chest with one hand and the grass below her navel with the other. 2 huge red clouds appeared on her pretty face. But it was a pity that her hand was too small compared to the area she wanted to cover. Therefore, her half-covered body, coupled with her embarrassed and angry expression, added a bit of charm and allure to her. Grim, who had transformed into a huge golden flame man, laughed maniacally. "Save it. You're an old witch who has been famous for hundreds of years, yet you still want to put on such a pure and innocent appearance. Are you trying to disgust me, or are you trying to stall for time? Don't you want my life very much? Now let's see who wants whose life." Along with the deafening roar of the flames, Grim waved his flaming coral staff, and a huge pillar of golden flames that was 100 meters thick exploded with the dark core at the center. The violent and ferocious golden flames collided with the dark and deep shadow energy, immediately causing an energy explosion that engulfed the entire dark space. The two energies of different attributes collided, entangled, devoured, and annihilated each other. A molten magic wall rose in front of Grim, barely blocking the surging energy waves. The dark witch, Shunny, was obviously unable to escape from the ritual. She could only watch as the golden flames madly eroded the protective barrier formed by the Shadow Pearl. The translucent barrier of darkness vibrated continuously, and even caused some of the energy inside to become chaotic. Shunny, who had been pretending to be innocent a moment ago, suddenly retracted her expression. The shyness and immaturity on her face were swept away, and her eyes emitted a cold and vicious glint. "How is this possible? You're just a newly promoted grade 4. With your strength, how could you so easily shake the Shadow Pearl's barrier?" Shunny screamed crazily, and her expression revealed a trace of madness and viciousness. She cannot be blamed for losing her composure, as Grim's attack power was indeed a little too abnormal. As Shunny's estimation was not accurate, she made two unforgivable mistakes. First, she thought that the grade 4 shadow assassin that the Shadow Pearl had catalyzed could buy her enough time to complete the ritual. That was why she did not cancel the ritual when she sensed Grim approaching. Second, when the shadow assassin failed, she thought that she could rely on the Shadow Pearl's protective barrier to last until the ritual ended. After all, she was only 3 minutes away from the completion of the ritual. Chapter 1102. This was a hidden crypt in the mountains. It was dark and deep. The air was filled with a chilling and terrifying aura. Suddenly, a deep light lit up in the absolute darkness. It briefly illuminated the underground cave that was about 100 square meters in size. Most of the cavern was empty. Only a small stone pond of about 5 by 4 meters square had been dug out in the center. Viscous and smelly black liquid flowed out of the pond. Amidst the strange sound of water, an abnormally pale woman's face emerged from the black liquid, followed by a pale, naked body and messy long hair. As soon as she emerged from the water, the strange woman suddenly opened her eyes, revealing a pair of brown eyes filled with endless hatred and anger. Looking at her face, it was the dark witch Shunny. "Good, very good. Grim, I'll remember your name. Our hatred is endless. I'll make sure you never have peace." After angrily cursing and venting a few words, Shunny finally managed to stand up from the small stone pool. The body that she had just condensed was weak and humble. Sensing the cold and damp air in the underground cave, she could not help but shiver. Her previous body had already been destroyed by the legendary fire wizard, and this body had just been condensed from the pool of spiritual energy. It had 0 magic resistance and was almost no different from an ordinary human girl. That was why it could not withstand the chill of the underground wind. However, this was not the focus of her attention. Shunny lowered her head and looked at her empty chest. Her eyes could not help but widen. "Where's the Shadow Pearl? Could it be that after I died, my soul did not bring the Shadow Pearl back when I escaped?" After searching for a few times, she could not find any trace of the Shadow Pearl. This time, Shunny completely exploded. It did not matter if other equipment and tools were lost, but the Shadow Pearl was the source of the Dark Witch clan's treasure. If it was lost, Shunny could not help but shiver again. She did not dare to imagine what would happen when she returned to the clan. Grim, I hate you. The hoarse and angry roar reverberated in the dark and deep underground cave for a long time. Huh? Isn't she a tier 4 witch? Why was his resistance so weak? That shadow assassin lasted for more than 10 seconds, but she couldn't even last 5 seconds. Grim clicked his tongue and sighed as he swiftly cleaned up the battlefield. The first thing that entered his hand was naturally the strange shadow pearl that looked like a black pebble. Attacked by the golden flames, the dark witch Shunny didn't even have the chance to make a sound after her protective force field was broken. She instantly turned into ashes. Naturally, the shadow pearl was left behind. Even though Grim was already a grade 4 wizard, he could still feel a slight tingling sensation on his palm when he touched this grade 5 shadow orb. Ajwa had only been able to withstand the corrosion of the pure shadow energy dispersing from the shadow pearl thanks to his high constitution and magic resistance. If it was a rank 3 magus, the flesh on their arms would have been corroded by the shadow orb and turned into shadow substance. Following Shunny's death and the change of ownership of the shadow pearl, the huge core of darkness quickly began to collapse and disperse. The shadow-like domain that enveloped Maplewood Town also began to dissipate bit by bit. Without the pull of the Darkness Tower, the instinctive repulsion between the Morian plane and the Shadow plane would cause them to separate on their own. However, Maplewood Town was an area where the two planes overlapped, so there would more or less be some shadow power left behind. It would take a long time for the chaotic laws of the plane to be completely restored. With the disappearance of the shadow-like domain, the power of the laws of the Morian plane regained control of the land, and the domain power that had been suppressing Wizard Holly and the two-headed wizard dissipated on its own. Wizard Holly and Leisha slowly stretched out their spirit senses, and as soon as they touched Grimm's, they knew the final result of the battle. Grimm was still here, but the aura of the dark witch Shunny had disappeared without a trace. Wasn't the result of the battle clear enough? Congratulations, sir. Wizard Holly was the first to send message. I knew that sinister woman would not be a match for Lord Grimm. Congratulations. Leisha naturally had to flatter Wizard Holly. To be honest, although the two of them spoke in a relaxed manner, their hearts were in turmoil. Who was Shunny? A rank 4 intermediate dark, which would have been famous for more than 500 years. Her own strength was already very terrifying, and she had planned this from the start. It was not like the two wizards did not see the arrangement she made last night. If they were to exchange their lives with Grimm, they would probably die here even if they had 10 lives. But now, when they woke up, the dark witch had disappeared, and only the legendary fire wizard was left. The situation was self-evident. Even the arrogant Wizard Holly could not help but lower his head and quietly express his goodwill to Grimm. After all, in the wizard world, a strong individual's strength was the fundamental guarantee of power and benefits. Without power, the so-called power and benefits were nothing more than fleeting clouds. While dealing with the two warm-hearted wizards, Grimm was reviewing some of the precious legacies left behind by the Dark Witch. After a night of battle, Grimm had obtained a Tier 5 Shadow Orb and a Tier 4 Shadow Diamond from the Dark Witch. He also found 2 pieces of equipment and a witchcraft tool from the ashes of the Dark Witch after she died. It was a pity that the other magic equipment could not withstand Grimm's series of attacks and were completely destroyed. Chip, is Shunny dead or not? Grimm pinched a magic earring with his fingers and asked with a frown. Beep. There are no traces of a soul's aura at the scene. Initial analysis is that she has used the energy pool to resurrect in another region. Grimm did not find the Chip's reply strange. The greatest characteristic of the Dark Witches was their immortality. However, this was not true immortality and was achieved with the help of the energy pool. Every time they went out, they would leave their soul imprint in a certain energy pool in a safe region. In this way, if he encountered danger outside and was facing death, he could rely on a special dark sorcery to escape his soul back into the pool of spiritual energy. This way, they would only need 10 days to half a month to recover, and they would be able to condense a new body and resurrect. However, the only thing he did not know was whether the soul of the dark which Shani had escaped back to the wizard world or was resurrecting somewhere in the Morian plane with great difficulty. If it was the latter, he would have to be careful of her sudden attacks later on in the journey. To be honest, a hidden rank 4 dark which was still a threat to Grimm even without her equipment and tools. Grimm sneered as he imagined Shani's exasperated expression. With the help of the AI chip, Grimm carefully appraised the 3 items in his hand. 2 rank 4 magic tools and 1 enchanted tool. Shani was indeed a core member of the Dark Witches of the North. Just based on the level of her equipment and magic tools, she was a few grades stronger than the wizards in the Central Continent. But now it was obvious that Grimm had benefited from it. Item name: Breath of Darkness item type. Magic earring item attribute. Dark item level. Rank 4 base strength. +3 agility, +2 spirit, +2 vitality special effect. Able to freely enter and exit areas with shadow energy, unaffected by any magic barriers. When the wearer is in the shadows, automatically evades the detection of divination spells and continues to repair the damage to the body. Skill: Shadow Ambush. Able to condense a lightless dagger to continuously attack the target for 75 seconds. Attack power 300 degrees. Cooldown 40 seconds. Looking at this strange magic earring, Grimm could not help but lick his lips, secretly cheering for the skill it came with. Shadow Ambush was indeed a good trick. As long as it was cast on the target, it could be ignored. A dagger condensed from dark energy would continue to entangle the target until the target was dead. Although 300 degrees of attack power was not high and could only be considered a nuisance to rank 4 enemies, it was more than enough to deal with rank 3 enemies that he could not show himself. Moreover, Shadow Ambush had a duration of 75 seconds and a cooldown of 40 seconds. This meant that he could summon a rank 3 basic shadow killer every 40 seconds. The effect was quite good. However, the power attribute of this earring was not suitable for Grimm. Once the shadow energy was exhausted, he would have to look for a dark wizard to recharge it. But now that Grimm had a shadow orb, he did not need to worry about the lack of shadow energy. Grimm put away the first wizard artifact with satisfaction and carefully inspected the second one. Item name: Ring of Shadows item type. Magic ring item attribute. Dark item level. Rank 4 base strength. +2 agility, +1 spirit, +1 vitality special effect. Duration of all dark curses doubled. All shadow damage doubled skill. Dark summoning. Able to summon a rank 4 basic shadow killer. It was also a pretty good rank 4 dark element magic tool, and it was very compatible with Shani's attributes. Chapter 1103. The remaining enchanted item was a Tablet of Fate. If it was placed close to one's body, it would heat up as soon as it sensed danger, alerting the user. It could be considered a good warning tool. Since this tool was related to the mysterious power of fate, it was difficult to determine its grade. However, based on the strength of the power of fate, the AI chip classified it as a grade 3 item. This meant that it had a certain degree of credibility when predicting the presence of a grade 3 creature or item. As for items that were grade 3 and above, it only had a vague warning function. Unlike the 2 grade 4 tools, this Tablet of Fate was not a source item, so Grimm could use it directly. Without hesitation, Grimm placed it in a pocket in front of his chest and pressed it tightly against his chest. After cleaning up the battlefield, the town was bathed in the golden light of dawn. The warm sunlight shone through the wooden windows on both ends of the corridor, dispersing the last trace of darkness in the air. Due to the fierce battle just now, the entire building was almost destroyed. The rooms on Grimm's side were all burnt to the ground by the flames, leaving only the broken walls and a few pieces of burnt furniture that barely showed their original appearance. Grimm pushed open the half-blackened wooden door. Just as he stepped into the charred corridor, the door on the other side of the building opened with a squeak. Wizard Hori walked out of the room while stretching his body. What a beautiful morning! Congratulations, Lord Grim. Wizard Holly turned a blind eye to the scene of devastation in front of him and greeted Grim with a face full of smiles. Grim naturally returned the greeting politely. The two of them exchanged a few fake pleasantries and walked down the half-collapsed stairs one after another. Chiolicia was also waiting for them in the hall on the first floor. With a tacit understanding, the three of them did not mention the battle last night, nor did they care about the hellish scene around them. They did not even ask about Shunny's whereabouts. Just as the three of them were chatting, a trembling voice suddenly sounded from the side. "Save me. Please save me." The three of them turned their heads and saw a middle-aged lady dressed in luxurious clothing. Her eyes were bleeding as she stretched out her withered and charred hands. She was shakily walking towards them. Grim furrowed his brows. With the intensity of the battle between him and Shunny last night, the entire Maplewood town should have been razed to the ground, and it was impossible for the residents here to survive. Moreover, Grim could clearly see that the middle-aged lady's entire body was somewhat hazy and illusory. Under the golden sunlight, her clothes and flesh seemed to be translucent. This form, this aura, it seemed a little like a specter. Before Grim could finish his thoughts, the two twin sisters drifted out from the dining hall not far away. Their faces were also covered in blood, and they were also crying for help. Their bodies were exactly the same as their mothers. Looks like their dead souls were bound to this land and were corroded by the overly dense shadow energy. That's why they turned into such a strange spirit form. Wizard Holly couldn't help but exclaim, "Don't worry about them. They are now considered to be earthbound spirits. As long as they're on this land, they're very hard to kill." Just as Holly finished his words, the middle-aged lady suddenly seemed to be enraged. She fiercely pounced towards him, and a pair of dirty, withered hands slashed across his body. But strangely, they did not touch anything. Facing the provocation of a low-ranked spirit, Wizard Holly's face suddenly changed. A hint of hatred appeared on his face. "Damn you. You really don't know how to read a situation. Looks like if I don't teach you a lesson, you won't know what fear is." Wizard Holly cursed with hatred. He lifted his hand, and a bright starlight fell on the middle-aged lady's body. The so-called spirit form was not afraid of physical attacks, but it could still be hurt by elemental spells. Under the shine of the starlight, the lady did not even have time to escape. She let out a shrill scream and melted into a puddle of black liquid, then evaporated. However, before Grim and the others could look away, a white light flashed in the corner of the hall, and the middle-aged lady appeared again. This time, she seemed to know how powerful the wizards were. She shrieked and shrank in the corner, not daring to provoke them again. The two beautiful twin sisters also screamed and ran out. As if they were affected by some kind of fluctuation, countless white figures appeared from all over the half-collapsed building and began to wander around aimlessly. Looking at their figures and appearance, they were the maids, servants, cooks, and guards of this noble's private mansion. They seemed to have not realized that they were already dead. They were all wearing the clothes they had when they were alive, and they were still busy in the building as usual. When the three of them walked out of the building, they realized that the town had already awakened. In the charred and collapsed ruins, strange spirits with hazy bodies were busy as usual. Some were sweating profusely as they worked hard to unload the goods. Some were wearing aprons and getting up to cook. Some were yawning and stretching as they dismantled the doors of their shops. Even more were wandering on the streets, greeting each other with a smile and saying good morning as if everything was still so warm. When they saw Grim and the others, they could not help but hide in the distance, peeping through the corners of the streets and through the gaps in the doors. They seemed to think that the three wizards were strange guests who had accidentally intruded. "Let's go." Grim glanced at the town one last time. He could not help but shake his head and leave with a sigh. There were too many secrets in the plane. Even with the power and wisdom of wizards, they might not be able to see through all the unknowns. And the battle between him and the dark witch Shunny, due to some kind of coincidence, had forcibly turned this human town into a ghost town. If it was any other time, Grimm might have stayed here for a while to study the mysteries of the spirits and the formation of the ghost town. Unfortunately, this was a dangerous plane, and he had a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, so he could only leave. Auspicious View Garden, Floating Space City. Lucia walked alone on the white moonstone path. This was the time when the Arcana apprentices would seize the time to study and try their best to pass the Arcana exam. Usually, there would be groups of Arcana apprentices wandering around the Arcana garden. Some of them would cover their faces with books, lying on the white jade railings, reciting those awkward magic spells. Some of them would circle around the Arcana fountain, repeatedly memorizing those mind-blowing Arcana formulas. Some of them would simply run to the spell pool and finish their Arcana routine for the day. But now, such scenes could no longer be seen. Ever since the dam retreat plan was secretly spread in Floating Space City, the whole Arcana school had been in a mess, giving people a strange feeling of not knowing what day it was. There were fewer and fewer apprentices in the Arcana school. Lucia walked for a long time, but she did not see any apprentices. Even if she did see some, they were just like her, walking in a hurry with books in their arms, looking worried. Hurrying through the Hall of Secret Spells, through the empty, winding corridors, Lucia quickly walked into the open-air Hall of Knowledge. This was the place where Arcana apprentices like her would listen to the public classes of the Arcanists. The Hall of Knowledge was open air, but above the hall was a layer of transparent Arcana barrier. Every time it rained, while watching the ripples of the raindrops blossoming and sliding on the Arcana barrier, listening to the Arcanists explaining various Arcana formulas and principles in simple terms, the strange feeling of the truth of the world being revealed in front of her was simply wonderful. Today's public class was taught by Sir Brown, a second circle Arcanist, himself, about the development of the Arcana Empire. This kind of class was also Lucia's favorite. So, even though she knew the current situation was not good, she still came here regardless of anything. There was still a quarter of an hour before the class started, and in the Hall of Knowledge that could accommodate thousands of people, there were only 3 to 5 people sitting sporadically. There were men and women, all very young, and like Lucia, they were all young apprentices who were born with a passion for Arcana. When Lucia found a seat in the front row and sat down, it didn't take long for the short, slightly bald Arcanist Brown, who was wearing a pair of gold-rimmed tortoise-shell glasses on the bridge of his nose, to come in. Looking at the sparse figures in the hall, Arcanist Brown sighed softly without anyone noticing. Soon he adjusted his mood, stood on the platform of truth, and used his deep and low voice to talk about the development history of the entire Arcana Empire in the past 10,000 years. Such a history, the Arcana apprentices had already browsed and read countless times through books and photographic crystals. But when a real Arcanist retold the history again with an irrefutable deep voice and called up pieces of precious historical images to support it, the inner passion of several Arcana apprentices was ignited again. One by one, they listened with flushed faces, their blood was boiling, and they could not wait to die in place of those Arcanists who were courageous, only to be able to let their names appear in that glorious and magnificent chapter of history. The 5-hour public lecture soon came to an end. When Arcanist Brown announced the end of the class with a hoarse voice, he lowered his head and slowly and carefully sorted out the Arcana props he had brought. Lucia didn't leave, but slowly came near the platform of truth. The Arcana Master's apprentices also silently gathered around. "Mentor, has the Arcana Empire really abandoned us?" The crowd was silent for a moment, and finally a male apprentice asked the question with a flushed face. Brown's hand trembled slightly. He didn't look up, and he didn't speak. "Mentor, thank you for your teaching during this time. My family has urged me to go back. Here is no longer a safe enough place. The male apprentice said incoherently, and in the end, even he himself didn't know what he was saying. Finally, he stopped talking, bowed deeply to Brown, turned around, and ran away as fast as he could. And those Arcana apprentices also sighed one after another, bowed, and left. "Mentor, I won't go. I still want to continue learning Arcana with you." Lucia bit her lips tightly, She bit so hard that she almost bled. At that moment, Arcanist Brown finally raised his head. There was a mist on his tortoise-shell glasses. "Leave, Lucia. The big tree that is the Arcana Empire is about to fall. What you need to do now is to get away from here as far as possible. In this way, you may be able to leave a seed of Arcana for the Morian plane in the future. Leave. Listen to me. Leave, Lucia." Chapter 1104. Under the gloomy sky, an arcane sentry tower swiftly flew across a vast plain filled with golden wheat. At the end of the plain, billowing black smoke rose into the sky, and earth-shattering roars of battle could be heard continuously. Looking into the distance, one could see strange monsters that were as large as hills colliding and killing in a frenzy. Fighting them to the death were huge arcane puppets that were hundreds of meters tall and made of azure crystals. While the battle on the ground was earth-shattering, the sky was not idle either. Strange monsters with eagle wings on their backs were fighting a bloody battle against the arcane watchtowers that were circling in the sky. Above them, a strange-looking star beast had already rushed to the especially large floating city. It was roaring furiously amidst the dense arcane cannons and torrents, destroying everything in front of it in a frenzy. This star beast was extremely large, almost the size of a human city. Its huge body was densely covered in pitch-black scales, and its lower body was densely packed with hundreds of thick appendages and giant legs. Although it was bloated and ferocious, it had a nimbleness that was not commensurate with its size. It twisted its body and roared loudly as it crawled forward quickly. The dense cannons fired from the floating fortress, and the arcane watchtowers blasted the surface of its body into a continuous sea of fire, leaving behind several meters deep and 10-meter-wide pits of flesh and blood. If this kind of injury had been inflicted on an ordinary creature, they would have died a long time ago. However, for this colossus that was thousands of meters in size, it was nothing more than a minor ailment. It couldn't harm its life force at all. However, such a concentrated barrage of arcane techniques still caused the star beast to suffer greatly. It raised its neck and let out all kinds of strange roars that shook the heaven and earth. It raised its giant claws and swiped around, and rows of tall arcane buildings collapsed in a huge dust pillar. Be it humans or buildings, it was impossible to remain intact under its sharp claws that were dozens of meters long. Even those arcane towers that were protected by powerful arcane powers would squeak and distort in a series of crackling energy explosions when they were swept by the astral beast's 10-meter-thick limbs. If the arcane tower did not evade in time and was attacked by the astral beast's horrifying limbs, even the arcane tower, which was known as a flying fortress, would explode into a huge firework after a series of earth-shattering explosions. If the official Arcana Tower was already in such a state, then the simplified guard towers were even more fragile. Therefore, in the face of this terrifying astral beast that was charging up the floating city, large groups of arcanists rushed out from various arcane towers and floating fortresses, controlling huge and mighty arcane puppets, surrounding the astral beast and madly attacking it. The parasitic beasts on the surface of the star beast's body were driven by the star beast to engage in a frenzied battle with the arcanists and arcane puppets. The powerful astral beast spewed thick energy beams of different colors, sweeping out a large area of death on the surface of the floating city, while twisting its body and trying to crawl to the core of the magnificent palace. Wherever its huge body and densely packed thick limbs passed, houses collapsed and the ground cracked, and the purplish-black blood flowing from the many wounds on its body fell on the ground, and soon it would condense into a violent and ferocious bloodthirsty beast. Their ferocity and strength were not inferior to that of a second-ring Arcana Master, and a Level 2 Arcane Tower, even in the Arcane Kingdom, could be regarded as a relatively noble profession. But for this huge astral beast, any drop of blood in its body combined with the matter in the plane could condense into a terrifying Level 2 monster. That also fully demonstrated the power and horror of this astral beast. It was just a level 6 astral beast. If it was outside the plane barrier, the huge arcane kingdom could rely on a large number of great arcanists and a powerful half-plane fortress to blast it into pieces with intensive firepower. But when this level 6 astral beast broke into the plane, although its attack power was limited to the peak of level 4, its huge body and strong physique made it a terrible monster that was almost impossible to destroy. In the face of such a huge astral beast, even the two arcane emperors who were as high as level 8 were a little fearful. With their power, it was naturally no problem to kill this astral beast. However, it was precisely because the power they controlled was too great that even a little bit of the residual power that leaked out would cause more damage to the floating city and this plane of existence than to the astral beast, and it would be even harder to deal with. It was also because of this that the great arcanists were so afraid and at their wits' end. These astral beasts could ignore the huge damage caused to the plane world by the wild battle, but they couldn't ignore it. After all, the Morian plane belonged to the arcane kingdom. It belonged to the arcanists and the great arcanists. Once their home was destroyed by unscrupulous attacks, how were they going to defend against the powerful enemies that were eyeing them covetously from outside the dimensional barrier, wanting to invade them on a large scale? The Light of Truth, floating city. As the largest and most powerful floating space city in the arcane kingdom, the Light of Truth played a pivotal role in the entire Morian plane. In the center of the Light of Truth floating city, there was a magnificent and exquisite Arcana palace. The palace was divided into 10 floors, and each floor was about 100 meters tall. On the broad and flat platform above, Arcana academies of various sizes, public libraries, Arcana institutes, study centers, observatory, Arcana laboratories, as well as a large number of puppet manufacturing rooms, were distributed in a disorderly manner. Among the only 2 arcane emperors of the arcane kingdom, the ruler, Garcia, was stationed there all year round. He had also built the Light of Truth floating city into the unique political and economic center of the entire arcane kingdom. It was a pity that at the time of the catastrophe, the Light of Truth floating city had become the main target of many powerful enemies from the outer realm. The 2 arcane emperors were still resisting the attacks of the terrible enemies outside the plane barrier. Inside the plane barrier, a grade 6 star-swallowing beast had entered the Morian plane and was attacking the Light of Truth floating city unscrupulously. It seemed that it wanted to attack the control center of the floating city and let the Light of Truth floating city fall from the sky. With the current scale of the Light of Truth floating city, once it fell to the ground, it would be difficult to rise to the sky again within 100 years. Once the Light of Truth fell, the half-plane fortress of the arcane kingdom, which was currently outside the plane barrier, would lose the necessary energy supply. At that time, relying on the half-plane fortress and the floating arcane tower to barely block the enemy's war front, there was a risk of instant collapse. Therefore, no matter how great the losses were, the arcanists had to annihilate the star-swallowing beast and break the invasion plot of the enemies from the outer realm. In the arcane palace, 3 grade 6 great arcanists gathered together and argued fiercely. Activate the Light of Annihilation. We must activate the Light of Annihilation. Otherwise, if the star-swallowing beast really attacks the center, what can we rely on to stop its advance? No, the power of the Light of Annihilation is too great. It will burn the energy core. Once the energy core is destroyed, do we have the resources to repair it? What should we do? Are you going to watch as our people die and our homes are trampled by soft-foot? This won't do, that won't do. Let me, this old man, rush out and fight with that big guy. I don't believe that the self-destruction of a grade 6 great arcanist can't kill it. The 3 of them argued fiercely, but none of them could convince the other. This caused the atmosphere in the hall to become unusually depressing and anxious. Just as the 3 of them were arguing, the star-swallowing beast moved forward another 100 meters. Wherever its gigantic body passed, all the buildings were crushed and destroyed, and all the living beings were slaughtered without a trace. The energy beam it spat out from its huge mouth even knocked down an arcane tower from the sky, causing it to fall in front of it while emitting thick black smoke. No, I can't take it anymore. I'll go tie down that star-swallowing beast. You guys continue to discuss here. The oldest of the three elders poked the marble floor with his walking stick, his eyes bloodshot. At this moment, an unusually gentle voice suddenly rang out in the hall. Nair, your temperament is still so impatient. There's no need for you to go. Leave this despicable fellow to me. As the gentle voice appeared, the huge arcana formation in the center of the hall suddenly lit up soundlessly. Countless mysterious runes and arcana formation radiated from within, outlining the figure of an unusually tall and majestic arcana master in the air. From the outside, he was just an old arcana master. He wore a simple arcana formation robe and held a shiny white arcana scepter in his hand. His expression was solemn and dignified, and under his snow-white eyebrows, two small, blinding suns shone in the depths of his eyes. This was an extremely ordinary arcana master. If one had to point out what made him different from other arcana masters, it would be the arcana crown that he wore on his white hair. There were layers of arcana ripples visible to the naked eye on it, faintly maintaining a deep and close connection with the floating city and the entire realm. However, at this moment, this strange arcana master with the arcana crown on his head was glowing with arcana light. It did not seem to have a human body, but rather a human projection condensed from arcana formation. When the three grand arcana masters saw the energy figure, they hurriedly bowed. You are the pursuer of the truth of arcana formations, guiding us forward. All right. At a time like this, there's no need to repeat these meaningless and nutritious speeches. You guys guard the Arcana Hall. I'll go deal with that fellow. Chapter 1105. As the huge and ferocious energy beam of the floating city's energy core linked to the humanoid shadow, the energy aura rising from his body became deeper and more restrained. Energy spear, arcane phantom, Philiast, light of truth. With the fierce shout of a humanoid shadow, a strange white light 3 meters thick shot out from his hand and landed on the head of the behemoth-like star-swallowing beast. It was strange to say that other energy beams and arcane halos would be distorted, refracted, and dissipate most of their power when they touched the protective force field outside the star-swallowing beast. But this strange white light didn't seem to belong to any elemental spectrum. It ignored the protective force field outside the star-swallowing beast's body and the tough and strange scales of the star-swallowing beast. It went straight through the star-swallowing beast's head without any hindrance. A moment ago, the star-swallowing beast was still advancing with an unstoppable momentum. But in the next moment, it was like a volcano that had suddenly erupted. A huge bloody hole was drilled into its huge head, and a thick, stinky blood pillar that was tens of meters tall sprayed out from it. The star-swallowing beast, which was seriously injured, raised its head and let out a deafening roar. A pair of huge green eyes with a diameter of more than 10 meters quickly focused on the strange humanoid shadow standing thousands of meters away above the arcane palace. One of the twin emperors of the arcane kingdom. The terrifying ruler, Garcia. No, it wasn't him. It was just one of his energy clones. Although the star-swallowing beast recognized the identity of the other party in an instant, in the face of a grade 8 arcane emperor's energy clone, even if it was the most terrifying star beast in the world, it had to retreat. After all, there was a huge gap in strength between the two sides. No matter how many ordinary Grand Arcanists came, the star-swallowing beast wouldn't be afraid. Because, under the shackles of the plane's laws, the upper limit of the arcane attack they could activate was only at the peak of grade 4. An attack of this level might kill most creatures, but it was difficult to cause a fatal blow to a void creature like the star-swallowing beast. It was precisely because it understood this that the star-swallowing beast dared to charge into the Morian plane and attack the floating city so boldly. But unfortunately, it wasn't lucky. Kasia, The ruler of the Emperor of Arcana, who was locked in a fierce battle in the Outer Realm, had actually split a part of his power to project back into the plane at this critical moment, forming an energy clone. This had clearly exceeded the star-devouring beast's expectations. Others might not be able to kill the star-swallowing beast, but an Emperor of Arcana like Garcia could definitely do it. Using the dimensional laws that he controlled and the powerful arcane energy provided by the energy core of the floating city, Kasia instantly created an arcane net around the star-swallowing beast, temporarily isolating it from the energy shackles of the dimensional laws. In this way, the upper limit of attacks in the planar plane was no longer limited to the pinnacle of Tier 4. In the next second, the energy beam formed from tens of thousands of arcane spears pierced through the Star-Devourer Beast's defenses and left a 3-meter-wide bloody hole in its head. As the sea of arcane energy surged in, the Star-Devourer Beast's flesh, bones, and body were all detonated. Howl! The Star-Devourer Beast raised its head and let out a deafening roar. All the Arcanists fighting on the floating city could not help but cover their ears and fall from the sky when they heard this roar. Purplish-black snakes of blood spurted out of their eyes, ears, mouths, and noses at the same time. Their spiritual world shook incessantly, and they almost instantly lost the ability to fight. However, this roar was the last of the Star-Devourer Beast's madness. After the roar, the Star-Devourer Beast's mountain-like body burst open everywhere, and countless amounts of terrifying blood splattered out. Its raised snake-like head finally drooped down powerlessly, smashing a small arcane tower below it into a pile of powder. As for the bloodthirsty beasts formed from its flesh and blood, they also collapsed at the same time, quickly dispersing into dirty blood and some jet-black, fishy, mysterious substances all over the ground. Sensing the death of the Tier 6 Star-Devourer Beast, the strange creatures that were still fighting around the floating city scattered like birds and beasts. The Arcanists naturally would not let them go easily, sending a large number of arcane watchtowers to chase after them and attack wildly. Both sides fought and retreated. Soon, the flames of war spread to the surrounding human cities and villages. These scattered exotic beasts may not be the opponents of the Arcanists in a one-on-one fight, but for those human settlements without the protection of arcane powers, it was no less than a terrible disaster. Any Tier 2 exotic beast could easily destroy a human town. As for those human cities with low-level Arcanists and a large number of arcane apprentices, once invaded by a large group of exotic beasts, even if the enemy was eventually repelled or destroyed, the entire city would be mostly turned into ruins. As for the citizens of the Arcane Kingdom who died because of the invasion of disaster creatures and star beasts, there were countless. Only those located in remote areas, far away from the floating city, could barely maintain peace. However, with more and more loopholes in the plane barrier, the exotic beasts and enemies invading the plane were getting stronger. Within the entire Morian plane, there were fewer and fewer areas that could continue to maintain peace. It had to be said that when the nest was overturned, there would be no intact eggs. When the entire Morian plane was facing the invasion of many powerful races, it was already an unrealistic fantasy to think that one could remain unscathed in this kind of world-ending disaster. To die standing or sitting, this was no longer a question, but a predestined fate. Auspicious Peace Province, 300 kilometers west of the floating city of Auspicious View Garden, in front of a small village by the mountains and water. Grimm's body was surrounded by a layer of golden flames, hiding his figure as he silently watched a group of exotic beasts wreaking havoc in the village in front of him. The village wasn't big, with only a population of 60 to 70 households. Most of the houses were old wooden houses, covered with green plants, which gave it a quiet and serene atmosphere. But at that moment, a group of exotic beasts that escaped from somewhere occupied the place and were slaughtering the unarmed, ordinary villagers. It was a group of exotic beasts. They had the wings of eagles, the heads of snakes, and the bodies of lions. Their bodies were filled with a disgusting bloodline smell. There were about 17 of them, and their strength was also around rank 1 or 2. Naturally, these fellows couldn't be the elites of the disaster camp, but just cannon fodder and errand boys. But for the arcane people in the village, they were already a terrifying demon that couldn't be defeated. So, do we go around them or kill them? Wizard Hiri, who drank the invisibility potion, asked softly without a care. Let's just kill them. Chiolisha, who used the light of the soul to cover her body, had a cold glint in her eyes. She also suggested, those disaster creatures are also our competitors. It's good to reduce their strength. Wizard Hiri scoffed at Chiolisha's suggestion. One had to know that from the beginning of the mission, he or she had been keeping a low profile, almost not daring to provoke any opponents. Now, he or she dared to poke the hornet's nest of the disaster creatures. Would this two-headed wizard be so kind to help the local natives? The answer was naturally no. The reason why Chiolisha said this was purely because she had seen through the legendary fire wizard's intentions, so she went along with his thoughts. Also, for such a long time, she had always maintained Chiolisha's personality. It had been a long time since she let Manga show himself. The meaning behind this was self-evident. We've already completed most of the missions given by the main team. We've already attacked 7 out of the 10 places to attack. Auspicious View Garden is not far away. Grim paused here. I think it's better for us to take a break at this time. If we kill these mutated beasts, we might be able to get some information about the disaster creatures from their brains. Leave it to me. Chiolisha was overjoyed that her suggestion was accepted by Grim. You guys go find a place to rest first. Leave these little guys to me. Grim nodded and took the lead to extinguish the flames. He revealed his body and walked towards the village. Wizard Hiri also shrugged indifferently and revealed his body, following closely behind Grim. Ever since the battle at Maplewood Town, both Hiri and Chiolisha had acknowledged Grim's strength and identity as the team leader. Since then, they had also become obedient. However, Wizard Holly only kept a respectful distance. He wasn't like Chiolisha, who eagerly revealed a look of wanting to rely on Abel's thigh. As soon as the two of them revealed themselves, the group of mutated beasts that were still wreaking havoc in the village sensed their presence. Looking at the eye-catching human form of the two, the mutated beasts screeched and flew into the sky. The metal spears in their hands were still pierced with human figures that were screaming in pain. Human, flesh, death. Their mouths muttered some strange syllables. The group of mutated beasts flapped their gray eagle wings and swooped down from the sky. They launched a fierce charge towards the two wizards. However, before they could reach Grim, an invisible psychic wave swept across the sky. They suddenly stopped their diving bodies and collided into a ball in the air. In an instant, countless green-gray eagle feathers filled the sky. One by one, their twisted bodies fell to the ground with blood flowing from their heads. The rank 1 mutated beasts all had their necks broken and their organs ruptured. None of them could get up from the ground again. Only the 4 rank 2 mutated beasts struggled to get up. Each of them had a dull look in their eyes as they stood in the same place. They had lost their ferocious and valiant attitude from before. Grim and Hiri stepped on the black blood stains as they walked past them and went straight into the village. Chiolisha appeared beside the 4 mutated beasts. Her eyes were filled with a strange red glow. She extended her finger and stabbed it into their foreheads. Chapter 1106. A rank 6 Star Devourer beast had died in battle. The army of mutated beasts sent by the Disaster Lord had been defeated. The clone of Emperor Agassi had appeared in the light of truth floating city. Grim could not help but frown at the series of reports. Ordinary rank 4 wizards were not willing to participate in this kind of otherworld battlefield. One of the main reasons was that it was too difficult to control the level of the battle. Originally, with Grim's party's strength, there weren't many tier 4 magi who could kill them in the inner plane. However, as the major factions continued to extend their hands in the Morian plane, the intensity and level of the planar war had skyrocketed. Grim and his team were rank 4 wizards, and they could already be regarded as the top fighting force in the plane. However, if they ran into those guys who pretended to be weak while they were on a rampage, they wouldn't be any better off than the Arcanists who were constantly losing ground. Therefore, ever since they broke into the Morian plane, Grim and his team had been keeping a low profile. If it were not for the damned attack mission from the A-Team, Grim and his team would not even want to participate in a pointless battle. Especially now that they heard that even a level 6-star swallowing beast had fallen in the Morian plane, their hearts would only be more anxious and fearful. The origin of these mutated beasts, Grim muttered to himself before asking in a low voice. They belong to a powerful calamity creature called the Extreme Night Overlord. They are the peripheral eyes and ears sent by the Extreme Night Overlord. We may have poked a hornet's nest by acting rashly this time. Chiolicia no longer had a smile on her face. What level is that Extreme Night Lord? Wizard Holly asked anxiously. Rank 6. It's also a rank 6. Chiolicia secretly spat and sighed at their bad luck. However, you don't have to worry too much. The main body of that Extreme Night Lord is still fighting the Arcane Kingdom outside the plane barrier. The one that entered the plane is only a rank 4 clone that it has corrupted. It's not a fatal threat to us yet. Hearing this, Wizard Holly breathed a sigh of relief. The calamity creatures were synonymous with chaos and violence. Their souls had already been contaminated and strengthened by the will of the calamity plane. They had become cannon fodder for the calamity lords in their wars and invasions. Therefore, there was no possibility of communication or cooperation with these fellows. Do you know why they are here? Grim frowned and thought hard. They had gathered a large force and wanted to capture the light of truth floating space city, but they were scattered by the Arcane Kingdom. As a result, the low-level disaster lords split up and searched for targets they were interested in. Although I'm unable to extract a complete attack route from the brains of those mutated beasts, I'm afraid that their route coincides with our target, Chiolicia said with a face full of anxiety. Auspicious View Gardens floating city? Grim pondered for a moment. Of course, that was the only place that could attract the disaster creatures. Didn't they risk their lives to cross the dimensional barrier just to slaughter and harvest life, energy, and souls? Where else could the quality of life, energy, and souls compare to the floating city that gathered a large number of arcane apprentices and arcanists? After breaking free from the sudden panic of hearing about the Calamity Lord, Wizard Hori's mind immediately became lively again. Do you think, if the 3 of us work together, can we kill that rank 4 disaster lord? I heard that astral beasts and disaster creatures are the best at absorbing the origin of the plane. They've been inside the plane for so long, maybe they've already plundered some source substance. At the mention of source substance, Grim and Chiolicia's eyes could not help but shine. To be honest, origin substance was extremely important to all Tier 4 sorcerers. If they had source substance, Grim's analysis of the law of fire would definitely be faster. For Chiolicia, source substance could also improve the degree of soul fusion between her and her brother, allowing them to get rid of the awkward situation of not being able to control their bodies at the same time. These lesser disaster lords are surrounded by a shocking number of mutated beasts. If we want to fight it, I'm afraid. Chiolicia was undoubtedly the weakest among the 3, so she hesitated and looked at Grim. I think we can give it a try. Grim thought for a moment. When a disaster lord reaches the rank of a lesser disaster lord, their internal strife is even more intense than their enemies in the outside world. That's why rank 4 lesser disaster lords always act alone. This way, we have the advantage in terms of the number of rank 4 wizards. Hearing this, Chiolicia's eyes could not help but light up. Moreover, it's the same target as us, so there will definitely be a conflict between them. Rather than being forced to fight, why not take the initiative and find that rank 4 Extreme Night clone, kill it, and reap some benefits? All right, I think this is a good idea. Wizard Holly chuckled. After all, we've signed an oath. so we can work together against enemies. With the combined strength of 3 rank 4 wizards, can we still not deal with that beast?" After saying this, Wizard Holly looked at Chiolicia, who hurriedly nodded. "I'll listen to you guys. Even if it's 3 against 1, I think we have a higher chance of winning." Wizard Holly nodded in satisfaction. After nightfall, the 3 of them went their separate ways. Walking along the lush-paved path in the village, Grim found a relatively clean and tidy wooden house. He then crossed the wooden fence that had been trampled on and came to the door. He gently pushed open the half-broken door. Asterisk creak. Asterisk the wooden door opened, revealing the messy furnishings inside. The people who originally lived here did not seem to be rich, and the furniture in the house was simple and old. Coupled with the invasion of the mutated beast, it was a complete mess. All the household furnishings were smashed and scattered on the ground. Grim shook his head slightly. Due to his long human habits, he still preferred to be clean and tidy, and the scene in front of him obviously did not make him happy. He stretched out a finger, and a faint red light condensed on his fingertip. Under the effect of the strange witchcraft, the scattered furniture on the ground slowly floated up from the ground and returned to their original positions, as if they were being moved by invisible hands. Grim snorted. His fingers flickered with a red glow as they moved quickly in the air, condensing into a dazzling golden rune. As the rune fluttered, it turned into a strange greenish-white whirlwind that blew in all directions of the wooden house. All the dust, filth, and debris disappeared in an instant. The entire wooden house was like a magical house from a fairy tale, instantly becoming resplendent and spotless. Grim went around all the rooms in the house, and after deciding on a bedroom and a laboratory, he began to make some simple arrangements. He released 5 rank 1 wind elementals to hover above the village and act as scouts. He also released 2 rank 2 rock puppets to guard the front of the wooden house. Grim then settled down in the room and began his daily meditation. As a spellcaster, meditation was the most important way for them to continuously train their spiritual force and raise the limit of their spiritual force. However, compared to when they were at a lower rank, the speed of their meditation was like that of a tortoise. Often, they would have to meditate arduously for many years in exchange for a slight improvement in their spiritual force. This was why many magi would think of ways to increase the effect of their meditation by using external objects. Otherwise, the unmoving threshold of their spiritual force would be enough to drive any determined magus crazy. Night quickly descended. 5 rank 1 wind elementals floated about 100 meters in the air, scanning their surroundings while monitoring everything that was happening in the small village below them. Although their presence was concealed, it was impossible for them to escape the senses of the other 2 magi, sensing the faint aura of Grim emanating from them. In addition to the fact that they were far away from the place they had chosen, Hori and Chiolicia didn't pay any attention to them. Although the 3 of them were in the same team and were bound by a contract, no magus would entrust their safety to another magus. Therefore, after Wizard Holly chose the largest wooden house in the village, he took out a strange Rubik's Cube from his storage space and threw it on the ground. Immediately, more than 10 exquisite puppets with the appearance of humans crawled out from within. There were males and females, and they wore the clothes of singers, maids, servants, and chefs respectively. As soon as they came out, they began to work diligently. The servants cleaned the room and moved out a set of clean tables and chairs from the Rubik's Cube, replacing the old wooden tables and chairs. The maids pushed out a delicately designed dining cart, and soon, brand new cutlery and utensils were placed in front of Wizard Holly. Other than releasing these service-type magic puppets, Wizard Holly also took out a piece of silver and threw it on the ground. Then, with a strange kacha-kacha sound, the silver piece of silver transformed into a metal golem with a silver glow flowing all over its body. This metal golem was only 3 meters tall. It held a shield in its left hand and a heavy sword in its right. Its body was sculpted into the shape of an iron knight. Below the face armor, made entirely of metal, a pair of scarlet lights flickered spiritedly. It was not as stiff and sluggish as the other golems. The aura it emitted was at the peak of rank 3. It was even stronger than the elemental magic puppet that Grimm had personally made. Chapter 1107. Compared to Wizard Holly's extravagance, Chiolicia's life was much more simple and low-key. There were no powerful puppets to keep watch at night, and there were no free personal servants to serve her. Chiolicia had to do it herself, and it took her a full hour to tidy up a hut that she could stay in. After taking care of everything, she stood in the middle of the hut, took out a green ball the size of a goose egg, and threw it on the floor. The ball immediately turned into a pool of green liquid and melted into the ground. With a flick of her finger, a thin, almost imperceptible green barrier enveloped the entire hut, isolating everything around it. On the barrier, there were all kinds of strange, hallucinogenic runes that were faintly discernible, constantly spreading psychic illusions and misleading any possible peeping eyes. The 5 wind spirits floated above the village and looked down. The area around Wizard Holly's residence was completely white. Nothing could be seen. Wizard Chiolicia's hut was unobstructed, and they could see all her activities through the gaps in the wooden boards. But it was precisely because he could see it so clearly that Grimm could not help but wonder if everything he saw was an illusion. After all, Chiolicia was very good at psychic abilities. The night was getting darker, and the sky was densely covered with beautiful, twinkling stars. However, in the pitch-black curtain of night, a strange dark red color enveloped the entire sky, causing the moonlight that shone down from the bright and clear moon to carry a trace of blood color that made one's mind restless. Blood moon. This was an ominous sign in any plane, and it was also an instinctive expression of the plane's consciousness. It also often indicated that on this quiet and peaceful night, there might be terrible bloodshed somewhere in the plane. And the bloodshed that could trigger a reaction from the plane's consciousness was terrifying. Grimm looked at the blood moon for a while, then gently closed the wooden window and sat back in front of the wooden table. He was not good at divination. If Alice was by his side at this moment, she would be able to describe in detail everything that happened somewhere far away based on the obvious signs of the plane. Unfortunately, in Grimm's place, apart from sensing the disturbing murderous aura, there was nothing else. Maybe there was another plane invasion in the Morian plane, or it would not have caused such a large-scale killing. Who was invading the arcane kingdom? The world of gods, or the calamity? Or was an abyssal demon? There were too many possibilities, too many guesses, and it made Grimm very upset. The threat of the Great Witch Mesa, the unpredictable future, the harsh and complicated living environment, the uncontrollable direction of development. All of these were weighing on Grimm's shoulders, making him feel more and more depressed. If it had been any other magus, under such pressure, they would have either become a pervert with a twisted mind or a hedonist who went crazy with eating and drinking. As for him, he could only keep his mind clear under such heavy pressure. He ran with all his might at a speed that ordinary people couldn't comprehend, using all the methods and resources he had to strengthen himself. After all, in the magus world, strength was everything. Only when he had absolute power could he be truly safe. He could stop and enjoy the pleasures of life. Therefore, after doing so much, Grimm only wanted one thing, and that was to survive. Back when he was still a wizard apprentice, his enemies only coveted his body and soul. But now, as he progressed and grew step by step, the enemies of the past had all vanished into thin air, but new enemies kept popping up. Today, he had achieved amazing achievements that outsiders couldn't imagine, but he had also set up some terrible enemies that ordinary people couldn't afford to provoke. Everything that the other side demanded was something that he couldn't afford to pay. Therefore, once he fell into the enemy's trap and was unable to break free, his fate would probably be no better than that of an apprentice. And this was also a sorrowful thing to be a wizard. Most of the time, it wasn't they who chose their life, but life was forcing and urging them to choose. Once they slowed down a little, some terrible things might happen that they didn't want to see. Therefore, when fate gave them something strange, it also made their lives turn into another rugged road where they would die if they didn't move forward. The big hand of fate was fiddling and whipping them from behind. Once they were a little slow, it would be the end of their legendary life. In addition to trying hard to adapt and endure such a life, Grimm had to find ways to surpass it. Only when he was strong enough to exceed the scope of the hand of fate could he really control his life. The night was dark. A scarlet blood moon hung high in the sky. The moonlight that shone on the land was soaked with an unbearable stench of blood. On a towering cliff, Satan's stood majestically. He stood there majestically, looking at the world in front of him with the arrogance of a king looking down on the world. It was intoxicated and satisfied as it sniffed the scent of blood floating in the air, sensing the thick, murderous aura that was almost impossible to disperse. Through the law plane, he could even hear the mournful screams of his prey before they died, or see the painful and twisted souls that flashed past. Life was also a kind of resource, and the souls of every creature in the plane were a part of history that couldn't be easily erased. But now they had all become his. Satan's? Evil Hove's personal wealth. As the great lord of extreme night, if he brought such a huge amount of wealth back to the disaster plane, he would probably receive the favor of the world and raise his personal rank, which had been stagnant for 1,000 years, by a small step. Tens of thousands of mutated beasts were scattered across the Kinto's continent, attacking cities and invading homes, harvesting countless life, energy, and souls for him. But it was a pity that there were too few high-quality souls. Thus, in Satan's, under Evil Hove's control and command, the scattered mutated beasts began to gather and aim in one direction. The great Arcanist city that floated high in the middle of the continent. Auspicious View Garden. That was his hunting target long ago, and he didn't even hesitate to fight a few lesser disaster overlords that chased after him. After getting a taste of the Lord of Extreme Night's violent and ferocious attacks, the weak mutated beasts could only swallow their anger and change directions, running to attack the other two floating cities. Thus, this beautiful and exquisite floating city became it. Satan's Tartarus? The target that Evil Hoves wanted to attack and kill the most. Under the night sky, the mutated beast army was still crazily slaughtering and plundering. The life and soul aura that floated over through the law plane entered Satan's body, making him feel increasingly comfortable and satisfied. That was until his enjoyment was interrupted by some despicable intruders. Satan's? Evil Hoves straightened his body, facing the night wind and sniffing with all his might. From the air, he detected a trace of an aura that didn't belong to a disaster creature. There was a trace of order and strictness in the chaotic evil, and a trace of treachery and cunning in the old-fashioned. Damn it, this is the aura of a magus. Some magi had actually intruded into his hunting area and slaughtered some of his people. Satan's? An evil and cruel aura rose from Evil Hove's powerful and malevolent body. All of a sudden, he exerted force on his 4 hooves and leaped from the top of the cliff, running wildly and unrestrainedly towards a certain place in the west. The chilly night wind whistled around him. Satan's ran wildly under the moonlight like a galloping horse, his speed far exceeding that of most flying creatures. Paddy fields, forests, and streams flashed past its feet. Along the way, he passed by many human villages and small towns. Cries and wails could be heard, and flames soared into the sky. Everywhere, he could see and hear the figures of mutated beasts slaughtering in a frenzy. However, Satan's didn't care at all. With a single leap, he could cover a distance of 100 meters. Just like that, he left the human settlements behind as he stubbornly and resolutely charged towards a certain place in the west. As for the mutated beasts that were scattered on the road, upon sensing Evil Hove's aura, they sped up to complete their harvest. They rushed out of the human villages and followed closely behind Satan's as he charged towards an unknown region in the distance. Under the night sky, a small mutated beast attack route was mysteriously born. With a single leap, Evil Hooves pounced onto a small hill and suddenly stopped. With a cold and cruel gaze, he swept his gaze across the pitch-black human village not far away. He could faintly sense the auras of 3 souls of varying strengths. In the surroundings of the village, he could also sense the scent of some elemental life forms. If the other party was too weak, Evil Hooves wouldn't have come all the way here to issue a warning. In his perception, the auras of the Magi hidden in the village had reached a level that even he had to pay attention to and be vigilant of. Hence, before the final hunt, he had to first eliminate the unstable factors in the surroundings. These weak Magi were undoubtedly a bunch of annoying little bugs. Not only were they annoying, they were also repulsive. Although their auras had reached the limit of what this plane could contain, Evil Hooves had always looked down on Magi, so he didn't treat them as his true opponents. After all, Magi were mostly born from intelligent races with low innate potential. They were either physically weak or had weak spiritual force, and they had all sorts of flaws that made people turn their noses up at them. With such a race and such a foundation, even if they were to forcefully raise their soul strength to rank 4 in the eyes of the great Satans, in Evil Hooves' eyes, they were still in the category of prey. However, today Evil Hooves had already found another easier prey. Hence, he had lost interest in hunting and killing these thorny prey. However, Evil Hooves didn't want his momentary mercy to cause these Magi to think ill of him and disrupt his feast of flesh and blood. Hence, some necessary warnings and suppression were necessary. Chapter 1108. As expected, Siahoof's arrival alerted Grim and the others. They were all grade 4 existences, after all. Although there was still a difference in strength between them, they had all put in a lot of effort into personal protection. Hence, when Siahoof appeared on a hill in the distance, Grim, Hiri, and Shiolisha all sensed it and woke up from their sleep or meditation. Their consciousness became active again. Grim had appeared in the sky above the wooden hut, looking at the ferocious beast crouching on the high ground in the distance. He was nervous and excited at the same time. Even in a large plane like the Sorcerer World, the Calamity creatures were extremely terrifying opponents. This was especially true for the Disaster Lords that had lived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. They were all powerful existences that were comparable to natural disasters in other planes. Countless planes that lacked the protection of powerful forces had been destroyed by them in one fell swoop, slaughtering all the living beings inside and looting all the precious resources. Even the origin of the plane that maintained the stability and development of the world had been extracted, causing the entire plane to collapse and become waste floating in the endless sea of stars. If sorcerers were like blood-sucking leeches attached to a plane, then disaster creatures were like army ants that devoured and gnawed on everything. Wherever they passed, the plane would collapse and all living beings would be wiped out. Only a few broken continents would slip into the void storms and become the hosts of the astral travelers. Both sides were at the top of the food chain, but there was a huge gap between their status and power. In terms of power, sorcerers were jackals and wolves, while Disaster Lord were tigers and leopards that dominated the forests. This was why Siahoof dared to charge in front of the sorcerers without any fear. In Grim's eyes, which had a variety of visual effects, this evil hoofed was no different from an ordinary creature of the plane. There was something different about its body. In terms of size, Siahoof's body wasn't huge. He was only 3 meters tall. It was a little too petite among the hundreds of Disaster Lords that could easily reach thousands of meters. However, considering that it was only a mutated clone of the level 6 Disaster Lord, it was reasonable for it to choose a more flexible body to invade the plane. Siaho's body resembled a mastiff, with smooth body lines, strong and powerful limbs, and sharp claws. However, the most attractive part of Siahoof was its head. Strictly speaking, Siahoof did not have a head. From the neck up, the entire head split open like 4 blooming petals, and the edges were covered with sharp teeth. A thick and long tentacle reached out from the center of the flower. At the end of the tentacle, there was a strange eyeball that was looking around. The terrifying monster stood on top of the hill, with its hind legs slightly squatting and its upper body erect. The four menacing rose petal-like mouth parts trembled in the direction of the sorcerers. The stalk in the middle kept twisting and turning as it looked at the three sorcerers. Without a greeting or a declaration of war, the evil hooves raised its body and let out a strange roar. Behind the hill, thousands of mutated beasts swarmed out and pounced on the wizards. The way the Lords of Calamity greeted each other was truly unique. The moment they saw each other, they chose to fight without saying a word. If you could resist the attack of its subordinates, you would naturally gain the right to talk to it as an equal. If you couldn't, weaklings had no right to talk or bargain. Grimm's eyes turned and quickly scanned the charging mutated beasts. There were many types of them, and their appearances were even more bizarre. There were almost all kinds of creatures. Among them, there were eagles with lion heads, tigers with deer bodies and wolf claws, and most of them were a mix of flesh and blood. It was hard to tell which species they belonged to. It was obvious that they were mutated creatures whose life force had been distorted by the Lord of Calamity's filthy power. They no longer had their original appearance and consciousness. As long as the Lord of Calamity gave the order, these mutated beasts would rush forward like madmen and tear apart any enemies that blocked their way. Their creature ranks ranged from rank 1 to rank 3. There was nothing they couldn't tolerate. They didn't differentiate between each other or their formation. Just like that, they gathered together and roared as they charged towards the three sorcerers. Grimm and Wizard Holly glanced at each other and immediately understood each other's intentions. Without any hesitation, they started fighting. As the most powerful elemental wizard among the three, Grimm's body that was originally only 2 meters tall grew to 10 meters in the blink of an eye. He stood firmly on the ground with both feet firmly planted on the ground. Crimson flames burned around his body, and magic tools that had turned into energy appeared on the surface of his body one after another. Flaming magic wall, meteor rain, flaming storm. While his body could still be elemental, Grimm waved his flaming coral staff lightly, projecting 3 powerful AoE fire spells towards the front of the battlefield. The flaming magic wall erected a 10 meters long and 3 meters wide wall of flames in front of the charging mutated beasts. Anyone that charged into it would suffer 900 degrees of fire damage per second. The rank 3 mutated beasts might be able to rely on their strong physique to break through this barrier, but the rank 1 and 2 mutated beasts would have their magical elements ignited the moment they came into contact with the demonic flames. In less than 3 seconds, they would quickly turn into piles of charcoal. Meteor rain, on the other hand, was a dense meteor shower that fell from the sky. Wherever it hit, it would explode into a huge fireball and shoot terrifying lava fragments in all directions. Flaming storm, on the other hand, was a ring-shaped flame shockwave that spread in all directions. Every life form that was hit by the flame wave would suffer 700 degrees of fire damage. There were 5 layers of flame waves, and the fire damage could be stacked. If such a compound attack was used against a rank 4 creature, it might not be powerful enough. However, if it was used against a large number of low-level creatures, it would be like opening up a huge incinerator on the battlefield. Whoever dared to charge and would immediately be incinerated into ashes by the 3 fire spells. They would not even have the chance to make a sound. Grimm did not use all of his trump cards in his first battle against a Lord-tier creature. Of the 4 fire effects, he only used Increase Fire Range and Empower Fire. He did not reveal the other 2. As for the Focus Crystal that was used as his trump card, he hid it well. He would not take it out unless it was a critical moment. Even so, as a rank 4 legendary fire wizard, Grimm's devastating power still made the attacks of the other 2 wizards look like soft water, soft and powerless. As soon as Grimm made his move, he instantly annihilated more than 300 mutated beasts that were charging at the forefront. Wizard Holly, under the illumination of the bright starlight, quickly put on his ectoplasm armor and charged into the group of mutated beasts like a hot knife through butter. The ectoplasm armor on Wizard Holly's body seemed a little strange. His punches and kicks had a terrifying power that far exceeded the normal metal puppets. A punch landed on a mutated beast that pounced on him. The strange starlight jumped on the bodies of several mutated beasts around him, instantly blowing them up into a ball of blood. Moreover, the strange starlight continued to shine down. Anyone that got close to Wizard Holly would be hit by the starlight and be paralyzed, unable to control their body. As long as they stopped for even a moment, they would be blown up by Wizard Holly's ferocious steel fists. No matter if it was a rank 1 or 2 little guy or a rank 3 ferocious mutated beast, there was only one result in front of Wizard Holly. They would explode into a bloody mess. For a moment, Wizard Holly controlled his magical armor that was overflowing with strange starlight and rushed left and right in the group of enemies. He was invincible. However, no matter how fast his punches and kicks were, it was not as fast as Grimm's flames, directly killing a group of them. As for Chiolicia, she still did not release Mangles, nor did she transform into a two-headed wizard. Relying on her powerful and strange mental witchcraft, she bewitched and tricked some mutated beasts, causing them to kill each other. These mutated beasts may be invincible monsters in front of the plane's natives, but in front of these rank 4 wizards who stood at the peak of the plane, they were still as weak as a flock of pitiful sheep. With a super meat shield like Wizard Holly at the front, Grimm did not need to worry about defense anymore. He turned his attention to his role as a cannon. He transformed into a 10-meter-tall flame giant, standing in the center of the village. From time to time, he would throw a fire spell to the front line, blocking the path of the mutated beasts. He let them run left and right like a bunch of blind people, unable to find a way out. Then they fell to the ground, howling in pain, and were burned into dried corpses. Although Grimm kept attacking, most of his attention was still focused on Evil Hoof, who was standing on the top of the hill. Even when the battle was at its most intense, Grimm still had 1 or 2 powerful fire spells in his hands that he had not used. If Evil Hoof made any strange moves, he would not hesitate to throw them on its body. Satan's? Evil Hoof was still standing on the top of the hill, silently observing the battlefield. Although his subordinates were being trampled by his opponent and slaughtered by the hundreds, he did not feel the slightest bit of pain or regret in the depths of his heart. No matter how many of them died, it wouldn't even bat an eyelid. As long as he could take down the floating city of the Arcane Kingdom, he could have as many mutated beasts as he wanted. Chapter 1109. To be honest, if these 3 magi were as powerful as the Fire Magus, Siahoof would have left without a second word. He would rather lose his entire army of mutated beasts than let this clone of his face the danger of dying. Similarly, if these 3 magi were as powerful as the Fire Magus, Siahoof would have taken the lead and charged forward without a second thought. He would not let such a high-quality prey slip by. It was a pity that the other party's team was too strange. Some were strong, some were weak. This made him feel a little depressed. The strong ones were troublesome to deal with, while the weak ones drooled. The petal-like mouth of the Evil Hoof lotus widened, its hooves slightly squatting, and its entire body instantly disappeared. Invisibility, teleportation, or some other strange ability. Grimm and the others were shocked. No matter how many mutated beasts there were, they could only force them back at most. It was impossible for them to surround and kill them. Hence, the only thing that could threaten the lives of these 3 Tier 4 magi was the strange-looking Lesser Lord of Disaster, Siahoof. Hence, the moment Siahoof disappeared, Grimm and the others on the battlefield could not help but raise their vigilance, wary of the enemy's sneak attack. Grimm scanned the surroundings, and with his multi-sensory eyes, he immediately caught sight of a blurry silhouette moving rapidly underground. It's underground. Chiolicia dodge, Grimm shouted, throwing a meteor that he had prepared for a long time at Chiolicia's feet. Chiolicia was the weakest of the 3, so she had long since prepared herself for this. As soon as she heard Grimm shout, she quickly flew into the air and moved the bright yellow shield in front of her to her feet. At the same time, the blazing meteor that Grim hurled out smashed towards the calm ground like a thunderbolt. Just as Chiolicia's feet left the ground, the originally hard and flat soil suddenly boiled like a swamp. The four-petaled lotus flower-shaped mouth protruded and closed. The sharp teeth on it collided with each other, creating dazzling sparks. By a hair's breadth, Chiolicia dodged the enemy's surprise underground attack. Only half of the creature's body had emerged from the water. The only eye on the stalk first glared at Chiolicia, then turned to Grim. A hint of ruthlessness flashed across its eyes. At this moment, the falling meteor was not far from the evil hoof. Before the violent and ferocious meteorite even got close, its terrifying temperature had already enveloped the surrounding void. Wisps of white smoke rose from the ground, and the soil near the landing point began to melt rapidly, showing signs of turning into lava. Siahoof grinned hideously and sank back into the soil. With a flash of earthen yellow light, the soil became even harder and thicker than rock. Boom! With an earth-shattering explosion, the meteorite smashed into the ground, creating a shallow pit that was more than half a meter deep. The bottom of the pit was filled with dense cracks like a spiderweb. Meanwhile, the extremely high-temperature flame flow and flame shockwaves spread out in all directions in a ring shape, throwing all matter out at a terrifying speed. Chiolicia, who had just flown up, was obviously not far enough away. She was immediately enveloped by the flames. The numerous witchcraft protective spells outside her body exploded into fine fireworks amidst a burst of crackling sounds, and the terrifying stream of flames instantly burned her legs into a patch of charred black. Chiolicia screamed and escaped. She flew high up in the sky, not daring to land again. Once she stabilized her body in the sky, she frantically took out some bottles from her clothes and poured them into her mouth with all her might. The injuries on her lower body were also recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Grim had transformed into a flame giant, so he naturally had a much wider field of vision than the average person. Deep in his black eyes, a blue light flashed as he constantly looked around, searching for the whereabouts of Siahoof. The violent attack just now had been completely neutralized by Siahoof. The meteorite, with a power of up to 1,600 degrees, was blocked by a simple earth elemental halo, causing Chiolicia more damage than Siahoof. And now, the evil hoof was nowhere to be seen. This time, even Grim couldn't help but feel nervous. As expected, with a wave of earthen yellow ripples, the soil under Grim's feet suddenly turned into loose quicksand, causing his flaming legs to sink into the ground. Not far away, Siahoof quickly drilled out of the soil. He opened his lotus petal-shaped mouth and spat out a thick cloud of earth mist at Grim. His opponent was actually proficient in earth elemental magic. This was obviously out of Grim's expectations. The quicksand trap and the gravity halo acted on his body at the same time, causing his tall, flaming body to sink bit by bit. The cloud of earth mist that Siahoof spat out contained terrifying earth elemental energy, and its target was Grim's heart. Evidently, Siahoof had also sensed the terrifying power of the heart of the law in Grim's chest. His body had already been shackled, and he could not escape. Grim could only raise his hands high and condense 2 1-meter-thick lava shields in front of him, stacking them together to block the earth mist. Asterisk puff, asterisk the khaki-colored mist struck the shield formed by the lava and quickly suppressed the scarlet flames. The surface of the lava shield quickly solidified and then fell off into green-gray powder. The 2 lava shields, which could withstand 1,000 to 2,000 degrees of elemental damage when stacked together, didn't even last 3 seconds against the earthen mist before shattering into dust. The moment the lava shield shattered, an even purer ray of earthen yellow penetrated the explosion and struck Grim's left arm. A strange petrifying force quickly infected the arm, causing Grim to almost lose control of it. Beep! Attacked by the petrifying ray, 2,100 degrees of energy, chaotic body activated, absorbing a portion of the earth elemental damage, 270 degrees of energy. Burning domain activated, negating a portion of the earth elemental damage, 240 degrees of energy. Flaming body activated, negating a portion of the earth elemental damage, 650 degrees of energy. Magic resistance activated, negating a portion of the earth elemental damage, 410 degrees of energy. A series of prompts from the AI chip filled Grimm's vision. Under the effects of his strange physique and multiple spells, the petrifying force that had invaded Grimm's body was cut down left and right, and its might was greatly reduced. However, the powerful attack of a Grade 4 Lesser Disaster Lord was not so easy to deal with. Even after being weakened several times, Grimm's body still suffered 500 degrees of elemental damage. This 500 degrees of petrifying force was not hidden at all, and after deducting all the true damage that was left behind, against them, Grimm could only rely on his powerful vitality of 31 points to endure. When the petrification ray hit the arm, the earthen yellow petrification energy and the scorching red flame energy intertwined. The flame arm near the hit area was dyed yellow and red. The colors were mottled, and they were still clashing fiercely. Grimm, who had transformed into a tall man, roared in pain and spat out a near-transparent golden flame from his mouth. His entire body was engulfed in raging flames, and streaks of crimson flame halos attacked in all directions like a violent storm. The evil hoof snickered, and with a stomp of its two front legs, it pulled up a thick wall of earth in front of it. When the raging waves of flames washed over and over again and the earth wall collapsed, the evil hoof that had been hiding behind the wall was nowhere to be found. When it reappeared, it was already 30 meters behind Grimm. Its ferocious mouth parts trembled, and the ground under its feet shook violently, as if it was experiencing a magnitude 10 earthquake. Thick earth spears rose from the ground like a forest of stone spears, madly stabbing towards Grimm from all angles. Seeing that this attack was even more frightening than the previous one, Grimm did not dare to be careless. He struck his chest with his hand, and a ring of flames that was far more powerful than before suddenly erupted. In an instant, the stone spear that was thrusting towards him was shattered into dust. When two violent, blazing fireballs landed where the evil hoof was just a moment ago, the evil hoof had already disappeared without a trace. After a few consecutive attacks to no avail, and he was almost injured by the evil hoof, Grimm's rage and resentment rose to the extreme. He lifted his foot and stomped fiercely. The soil beneath him immediately cracked and shattered. Streams of red and tumbling magma gushed out from within and instantly condensed into a huge lava pool around him. At the same time, his raging body of flames once again surged with heat waves. The temperature quickly rose from 2,000 degrees to 7,000 degrees, and an egg-shaped light screen of flames covering an area of 300 meters completely enveloped him. It was filled with terrifyingly high-temperature flames and golden flames that were everywhere. After completing his final defense, Grimm's eyes began to burn with passion. He turned into two small suns, frantically scanning the ground around him. As far as his eyes could see, lines of fire left clear burn marks on the ground. Wherever his eyes stopped, the soil would melt, the rocks would soften, and a small pool of lava would be created in an instant. Wizard Holly, who was still fighting the evil hoof, secretly saw this scene, and his face could not help but twitch crazily. Monster! Monster! They're all F***king monsters. After advancing to rank 4, Wizard Hiri relied on his strange sense of starlight and his powerful astral construct. Although he wasn't invincible among rank 4 wizards, he was still a well-known figure among the rank 4 beginner wizards. But today, after coming to this foreign plane battlefield, he finally knew what a real rank 4 powerhouse looked like. Damn it, these two guys had just started fighting, and they had already raised the intensity of the battlefield to such a degree. Now, those two guys could easily be hit by more than 2,000 points of elemental attack. even with Wizard Holly's strong starlight armor and magic resistance. If he got hit by it, he would at least be skinned alive. Chapter 11:10. If Wizard Hiri was only afraid, Xiao was on the brink of despair. Although she and Mangles had advanced to rank 4 by combining their strength, there was still a huge flaw. So far, other than when they transformed, they were considered to be grade 4 wizards. For the rest of the time, they were only in a transitional state between grade 3 and grade 4. If they encountered a rank 3 wizard, they could rely on their two-headed transformation to suppress their opponent. However, if they encountered a real rank 4 wizard, they would be as weak as a pile of rotten meat after the short transformation period. Moreover, their biggest problem now was that their defense was not strong enough. Whether it was physique or magic resistance, they were far weaker than normal rank 4 wizards. Plus, they did not have any powerful defensive spells, which made their bodies especially weak. Not to mention fighting a tier 4 creature. Just a shockwave from Grimm's long-range rescue was enough to break through their physical defenses and cause accidental injuries. That alone was enough to prove their strength. With Xiao and Mangle's combined defense, they could barely resist the elemental damage below 1,200 degrees. If it was beyond that, they could only take it head-on. However, Grimm's physique was as high as 31 points, so he could withstand the next attack and only suffer small injury. Xiao and the others only had 26 points of physique. With this kind of physique and magic resistance, if they were hit by Evil Hoof, they would probably suffer serious injuries. Therefore, after seeing the battle escalate, even if she was unwilling, Xiao could only summon her brother's soul. The two completed their transformation and expanded into that ferocious, two-headed wizard. Facing the menacing rank 4 Lesser Disaster Lord, Grimm, Hiri, and Xiao simultaneously took out their strongest forms and began to fight seriously. They had to admit that Evil Hoof's elemental control and coordination far surpassed them. Wizards were more like a group of elemental manipulators. Although they used various innate abilities and elemental affinity to link themselves with the elements, they could control the elemental energy as if they were their own arms. However, wizards were still wizards, and elements were still elements. The two were not completely equal. Xiahoof, on the other hand, was completely different. He seemed to have fused deeply with the earth element. Looking at how it launched its attack, it didn't need any spells or hand gestures to guide it at all. It could do whatever it wanted with just a thought. Hence, it could often use a simple earth elemental spell to block or dissolve Grimm's powerful fire spells. Moreover, it was extremely adept at turning mud to stone, turning stone to mud, and using the petrification ray. If he wanted to kill the fire wizard, he would need at least 80% of his power, and he would have to bear the brunt of the fire wizard's retaliation. As for the two-headed wizard, 20% of his power would be enough to deal with him. Therefore, as he fought, Xiahoof quickly evaluated the situation. He had to admit that even with the help of the mutated beast army, it was still difficult for him to kill the 3 wizards in front of him. If he continued fighting like this, the gains would be completely disproportionate to the losses he had to pay. Therefore, after attacking wildly for a while, Xiahoof returned to the top of the hill in the distance with a sway of his body. Under the command of its strange howl, the mutant beasts also stopped attacking and retreated to the small hill, gathering into a black mass. Human wizard, I, Lord Xiahoof, have acknowledged your strength. If we continue fighting like this, our strength will be wasted for nothing. But how about this? Let's work together. Xiahoof stood on the top of the hill, his mouth that looked like a blossoming rose petals flapping slowly, using his spiritual force to simulate a strange whistle. Work together? The 3 sorcerers, who were more or less injured, looked at each other, clearly not understanding what was going on. Grimm shook his huge body and slowly took 2 steps forward. He stared at Xiahoof and yelled, "What do you mean by work together, sir? Wizard Hiri and the two-headed wizard also slowly retreated to Grimm's side, forming a new formation. However, the three wizards' power was too exclusive, and they could not completely trust each other. Therefore, they kept a safe distance of 100 to 200 meters between each other, not daring to enter another wizard's area of influence. This was also the norm among high-ranking wizards, so it was not surprising. Since you're here, you're probably here for the floating city, right? Siahoof continued to negotiate. Grimm and the other two wizards looked at each other. Hiri and the two-headed wizard did not say anything, showing that they were completely following Grimm's orders. Regarding this, there was actually nothing to keep secret. After all, in this dangerous moment, a few wizards from another world sneaked in a Morian plane and quietly came to the floating city of Auspicious View Garden. It would be an insult to the other party's intelligence to say that they did not have any ulterior motives. After seeing Grimm's incarnation of a tall man nodding silently, Siahoof's open mouth vibrated even more violently. Since we both have the same goal, and we can't kill each other, then let's work together. Siahoof's ugly mouth pointed at Grimm. What I need are the lives and souls of the people in the floating city. You don't need these things, do you? What I need is the high-ranking knowledge and rare resources of the arcane kingdom stored in it. If you don't mind, I'm also interested in the energy core. Grimm pondered for a moment, then stated his needs. Siahoof did not show any objection or dissatisfaction. I want the secrets of the arcane kingdom's high-ranking arcane puppets. Wizard Hiri also carefully stated his needs. Originally, he wanted a lot of things, but on such an occasion, it was obviously very irrational to offend the little disaster lord by asking for too much. And in such a cooperation, everyone's gains were directly related to their own strength. In the battle just now, he did not show his strength that the other party was afraid of, so naturally, he could not ask for more. I wanted to. The two-headed wizard was overjoyed when he saw this. Just as he was about to open his mouth to say his needs, a cold and terrifying mental force wrapped around his body, so he could only shut his mouth. Siahoof obviously did not care about his or her strength. He was only allowed to join the team purely for the sake of the other two wizards. Therefore, a bonus like him or her naturally did not have the right to ask for anything. Anyway, the floating city was so big, it would be enough to just give him or her some leftover materials. After all, in the eyes of a disaster creature like Siahoof, everything was determined by strength. Without strength, one could only wait to become someone else's prey. Looks like there's still room for cooperation. That floating city isn't that easy to deal with. There's still a grand arcanist left on it. Why don't we work together to kill him? His body and soul belong to me, and the rest of the equipment belongs to you. What do you think? Although Siahoof's proposal was a little overbearing and decisive, it still attracted the interest of Grimm and the others. A grand arcanist? The mission information given by the A-team didn't mention this. Was it an oversight or intentional? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.